Where's your paints, dude?
Right next to me.
Oh, looks like we might be live here. I'll get you water. Oh, yeah. Hey, folks. We're having some technical difficulties for our first time here, but just bear with us.
Can they see those paints? Or like the numbers maybe a little bit?
I can. Okay, where is...
Or we can line them up somewhere else.
Getting ready. Let's see. Oh boy, I think I gotta do our video resolution. Oh boy. I think we're live.
Are we doing it?
Let's see here. Hasn't changed over. Waiting for Anthony and Cynthia. Okay. There we go.
Good.
Yeah, it's gonna be a little staticky here. Oh, Margaret's on. Yay. Hopefully it's coming through okay. Yep, looks like there's a little delay.
Good though?
How you doing, Margaret?
Everything up?
It's I'm just gonna test the cameras real quick here. There's Chris's hands with a red dragon, and the other one. There we go. Let's see. Oh, you can see your paints, Chris. Got dragons, wings. Okay. Let's see. Let's put that on. That's streaming live. Okay, we have a few people on now. And can hear the heater in the background. Okay. I'll work on that right now. I just have to turn this down. Chris, it's probably the fan here. Okay. We have Maven on. Hi, Maven.
Everybody good to go?
Yeah, let's
getting there?
not receiving enough video to maintain smooth streaming as such. Viewers a week. Okay. Yeah, that's what I was afraid of. Okay. Well, Chris, you might as well start. You can get start painting. If you have your red dragons, great. If you have another mini, that works too. Again, hopefully everybody's bearing with us as we're trying to fumble through all this.
Loads of technical stuff. I guess we'll start with the underside and kind of work our way up from there. Gonna use leather brown. Everybody see that okay? Hopefully, I think.
Can everybody hear Chris that's on? give us a thumbs up or yay or nay.
And we're just going to mix that. You can see that about 50-50. Kind of make it a little thinner than you normally would. But again, it's just a base coat, so it's not going to matter too much. And then basically just going to go through and do everything that you would see that would be an underbelly of a dragon. Under his chin, if you can see in there. Down along the scales. Typically when I do this, I kind of like to add a little bit of a level of realism to it, and I'll do kind of just an edge under his arm. There's like a different kind of scale pattern under there, and I typically try to get that. It does come around the back side, and I mean, it just makes an overall better model, I feel. It gives it more depth. Kind of creates a shadow that's almost not there when you've got him sitting on the tabletop. And really just from here, a lot of filling in. This is the part during the class that everybody's like kind of working on their stuff, and I'm just walking around making sure everybody's doing okay. It does take a minute. Again, don't worry about being too super precise with it. It's a big enough model and it's going to have enough table presence that you really don't need to worry about all the little tiny details. I mean, if this was like some commander for a Warhammer army or something, yeah, definitely. I mean, you know, go all out with the detail, but I mean, in all reality, like, your party's going to be so caught up in fighting this guy that just even having him on the table physically there is going to be enough to really make what you're trying to make happen. So just don't be too super caught up in the details to try to flesh him out, make it happen. Wash is your best friend. That'll all help in the end. Hopefully everybody's hearing this all okay and everything's all going well.
So far, so good.
Hopefully everybody can see what I'm working on as well. It's definitely interesting, kind of ducking behind wires and doing all this other fun stuff, but we'll see. As long as it works, it works. And really, again, I mean, yeah, I put a couple drops of water on the palette before I started everything, but I haven't added any water since. Just, you know, just kind of try to make a mess, I guess. It's a base coat. It doesn't have to be super pretty. Just try to remember all the little spots and spaces and places where you're trying to get to. Again, that like kind of underarm, whatever you'd call it, like the underside of the arm. Work it all in there. If you wanted to, it's kind of optional. I mean, we can go through and do everything at the end as well. If you wanted to, you could go through and pick out all the little claws and stuff right now too. That would be an okay time or an appropriate time to do that with this brown. But we can do it all again later after we do the washes and all that fun stuff. That's more like last minute kind of detail stuff. All those little hidey spaces in between all those little fingers. Now is when you kind of want to just make sure you've really coated everything well. The paint is already almost starting to dry where I've been. That's where that kind of thin layer really helps you. It does dry a lot faster as well. So it really just kind of keeps you moving, keeps your momentum going. You don't have to stop and wait for things and kind of like lose your focus, lose what you were working on. For the cat fans out there, got to paint the little dragon toe beans. I know there are some people that just laughed at that. I'm a dog guy myself, no hate. And again, we're just kind of going through and just making sure that everything... I'm going to touch a little more of that watery paint up here just to kind of make sure that it flows into all these little details. I really want the spaces filled in. I've gotten the majority of it bulked out. You're going to be going over this with a lighter shade afterwards for a highlight, so it doesn't really matter if everything is super, super perfect. this will be a great opportunity for you guys to see how I dry brush. I've actually been like looking forward to this for a long time because you guys actually get to see me paint a mini now, which is cool. As Anthony knows, and as some of you probably know, I don't own much technology myself, so I don't really have an opportunity to do this. So I guess with the whole coronavirus thing going on, I had to mention it, but
and we are practicing our social distancing ourselves.
Indeed, Anthony's a couple feet away. I got my mask on. If he gets too close, and but basically, out of everything bad comes something good. So you guys get to actually watch me paint a mini this time. Make sure I get his little hand in there. I want to make sure that detail is covered. And I think that pretty much about does it for that. And you guys are probably seeing me kind of stretch these wings a little bit. I mean, I have kind of, made the miniature a little bit more pliable and just kind of spread them slowly over time. That's more just to help me when we get to his back to kind of paint those little recesses in there. I'm just kind of trying to prep the mini and like work his wings now to make it easier down the road. I wouldn't recommend really hauling on them. I mean, they are just a little piece of plastic, but you can kind of push them around a little bit.
Well, someone definitely liked your dragon toe beans.
Dragon toe beans. I have had cats in the past. He was a orange tabby. His name was Ozzy, for those who didn't know. Maybe we'll make that a mystery question in one of our next painting classes.
Sounds great.
We're just doing the same thing here that we did with the body. We're just kind of fleshing this out. The one thing you want to remember that it took me a while to kind of pick up on is when you're doing wings or when you're doing anything that if the mini is going to be sitting like this when he's done and completed, when you wash these wings, you're actually going to want to wash them like you would any other regular mini. But instead of letting him dry as he's going to be, anything that's on the underside, you're actually going to want to turn him upside down for a minute and kind of like let him do a handstand, maybe put him up against something and let it dry that way, because you're actually looking at the shadows inverted in real life when you see them. So rather than having the shadow from the wash dry down here, you're going to want the shadowy area up here, and that'll really help you by turning him upside down. Little quick tip there. It does not work on Yetis. It's only for like dragons and things. Need just a little more paint. Again, using leather brown. I think you can see that. A little drop of water. Just this, all I did was dip my brush into the water, pulled it out, made sure I didn't drip all over Anthony's carpet, and right onto the palette. So I don't measure them anymore. As long as it gets good coverage, I'll kind of show you what I mean here. I'll go right straight for the water. See how it kind of gets really thin and it's not even? So for that, I would just, you can even do it on the model as long as it's big enough, and almost use the model as the palette as you're kind of blending your colors and trying to blend your water mixtures. Just make sure he's got good coverage. That's really all you're going for. There's no real rhyme or reason to it. Whatever works for you works for him. I know a lot of people kind of get hung up on, are my paints thinned right? Are you using a medium? Or it's really just water. I mean, you can go the other route and use mediums and do all that stuff, but I really find if you're just trying to keep it like cheap and tabletop worthy, just use water. It works just as good. Everything's water-based now. It's not the 70s. We're not using oil-based paints anymore. The old Testors paints used to be horrible when I was a kid. You had to open every window in the house. Mom always got mad.
Hey, you got a important question, Chris.
All right.
Well, what kind of music are we listening to in the background? What's your song of choice? Or
in the background, we are currently listening to Led Zeppelin. When the Levee Breaks, for those that are Led Zeppelin fans. I believe it just switched over to cashmere, though. Music choice is honestly whatever works for you. I mean, I know some people that listen to classical music when they paint. I know some people that listen to like heavy death metal. It's all whatever works for you. What do you listen to when you paint? I guess that's a good one for the audience. What does everybody else listen to? Throw me some suggestions. And really, we're just still back to fleshing this guy out again, just making sure it's just a base coat, doesn't need to be pretty. In the meantime, now is a good time if anybody wants to ask any questions while we're just kind of fleshing out this base tone. The one thing that I'm going to do is going to kind of skip on the wings. I'm going to skip the middle step where we kind of do like a highlight stage, because again, it's just a very shadowy area. And I'll kind of show you when we get there, but holding him upside down like that and painting him, you can almost paint his underbelly while you're waiting for his wings to dry to keep yourself moving. I find that's a big thing, is to just try to keep moving.
We have Margaret likes to put on some TV when she's painting.
Okay, so we'll go with Margaret's answer first, because that's the first one that popped up. She says she likes to watch TV. Do you watch movies or TV? Because I will add to that, if I'm watching TV or have a TV on while I'm painting minis, I do get specific, and it is either the Labyrinth or the Dark Crystal.
You have a shout out. We miss you being a DM for the kids.
Oh man, I miss it so much too. I had an awesome campaign that was like totally pre-written, ready to go. Like, I had so much stuff that was ready to go for those guys. I'm ready when they are, when we all get back. High hopes. Someday we'll all get back to normal. The kobolds are waiting.
And do you have a name picked out for your red dragon yet?
Do I have a name? No, I do not. For those that are in my campaign or know of my campaign, my ranger actually just so happened to wrangle a green dragon at one point in time. And I personally have a green dragon. So we're still kind of debating names on that one. I believe the fire dragon from the Zelda Ocarina of Time was a suggestion, so maybe that could be the name of your red dragon. I don't know how to pronounce that, and I'm not even going to try for those who have played Ocarina of Time. That is one of my favorite games. We're going to do a little bit of the red here just to kind of wait for his wings to dry just for a second, just to give us something else to do. We're going to go with fresh blood. It's going to be toned down a lot by the time we get to the end. And again, at this point, I'm just going to kind of flesh out some of the backs of his wings. That's going to be a place that we're not really going to be touching for a few minutes, so that'll be a good place. And the other thing you want to keep in mind too is just because I'm not touching on this side, you want to make sure of where your hand is placed on the other side. Don't touch any of the things you just painted. Try to keep your hand, and it's going to want to naturally gravitate towards the inside of that wing. Just try to keep yourself away from it. Another little drop of water on here. I hope you guys can see that. The red is a very good color for knowing how thin your paints are. Anything red, yellow, really anything bright will tell you if your paint is too thin or too thick. Now is a good time to try to tuck in that weird little spot in between his wing. Again, just kind of try to be careful as you're doing things. If you get a little over on here, it's not going to matter. We're going to kind of go along the edge anyway. And what little bit of a highlight we're going to do on that wing, we can do after, and it'll cover that edge. So again, we're just base coating. You know, it doesn't need to be super precise. I'm open for suggestions as far as the spine goes on his back. I was kind of thinking keep it red, but I'm open to some suggestions on that one for color if you guys want to throw some, hey, why don't we try this? You know, yellow also looks good. It really all depends, whatever you want to do. I mean, you could even do them black, you could do them purple. The only color I wouldn't recommend would be blue, because optically you're going to give yourself that like 3D effect unintentionally, and it's just going to be really weird and hard to look at. I typically do the top side of dragon wings the same color as the body. However, and I suppose it's just personal choice, but when I do the smaller creatures like wyverns and that kind of thing, pretty sure I pronounced that right, those guys I actually do not paint the tops of their wings their corresponding body color, and I do it the same color as the wing. I don't know why. For those who have played Quest 64 a long time ago, you may know the answer. That was a pretty inspirational game. I bet about one other person in the world has played that game. And again, we're just going to kind of mix a little bit of 50-50 water paint. It's a little thin right here, so I'm going to go back in and just grab a little extra dab of paint. And we're really just looking for a consistent, fairly even coat. But the red we're definitely going to have to go over twice, because that's the main color on him. You want it very bold, you want the colors and edges sharp. So we'll definitely do that twice. Again, we're just kind of killing time right now, waiting for the insides of those wings to dry. This one's actually okay, but this one's a little damp, and then we'll go ahead and do the wash. Notice I haven't painted the edges of these wings, because that is a spot you're going to want your fingers when you're doing all this. So try to stay away from these 2 points if you're just going to kind of bulk out stuff while you're waiting. I suppose that is somewhat important. I can kind of give this a second coating of the same layer and consistency. And kind of right here, hopefully you guys can see this well. You can see the differences in these 2 layers. This one's kind of thin. This one's like what you're actually really going to shoot for in the end. But again, we're just kind of killing time here, waiting for the inside of that wing to dry, and just kind of trying to keep the momentum up. This kind of all goes back to my famous finish the mini, which, granted, if I were doing like a hero character or something, or I were doing like my own personal mini for a game, I would probably spend about the entire amount of time that I'm going to spend on this dragon on one mini. So it all depends on what you're going for an overall finish. I've already kind of touched on the fact that, you know, even just having this guy on the table is going to make everything so much better. And I got that pretty well filled in there for now. Any dark washes, that's kind of a tricky spot on this guy. Is going to be right inside that weird little shoulder spot. So that's going to be a spot to kind of try to, I'll put a little thicker paint in there just to try to get that. Right now, while it doesn't matter if I make a mess. At this point, almost there on that wing. I may have put that paint a little too thin, but and again, just kind of try to flesh out. I did touch a little bit right there that I didn't want to, but we can fix that after. We're just fleshing out some colors here, trying to figure out where the line is going to be. And there's almost like a smaller row of scales right here. And that's where I'm going to draw the line, is right there. If I can manage to not bump all the wires on this table right now. I'm starting to have a lot more respect for all the YouTubers that do this out there. I don't know if they have to like peek around cameras and wires and stuff too when they're doing this, but if they do, that's pretty impressive. Shout out to those guys.
Yes. Do you have like a metal color, like a gold plating for the spine?
We could do that. I suppose we could do that anywhere, because I mean anywhere we wanted to. I prefer personally, if I'm doing like a dragon or something, to try to keep things a little more natural, because it's a red dragon. I know there's like the metallic breeds of dragons, and I guess if you're trying to go for the chromatic thing and actually own like all, 5 or 6 or 8 colored dragons, I mean, we definitely could though. That's suggestion number 1.
Mm-hmm. And I didn't forget you, Margaret. She's likes 30 Rock when she's watching other TV series like that.
All right. I can't say I've seen too much of that. I have seen it. One of my older favorite shows, not to try to date myself, but I remember a show called Third Rock from the Sun. That was a funny show. Again, right here, we're not really being super picky about where all this goes. It's all just kind of trying to fill in the little spaces right now. I know it looks very watered down. It is. I'm just kind of trying to not make a huge mess of it at this point. And just kind of trying to flesh out where I want things to be. I suppose to touch on Margaret's point, if I were to do this in any kind of like a gold or a copper or any kind of metallic, all metallics, when I paint them, I always do silver first. It always makes the metallic, any kind of metallic you're doing, really pop. Be it gold, copper, even like a brass, I always do a silver undertone first. I find it makes it just way easier.
Let's just throw something out there. So the reason why we're saying Margaret, because Margaret, you're the only one that actually has your name on there. Everybody else that I keep seeing pop up here, oh, Maven, hi Maven, I don't know what their tags are, so we apologize for not calling you by the right name, but that was someone else's, the gold plating. We just got, Margaret was also talking about maybe a fire effect on the spine.
Okay.
And thanks, people are saying it's coming through pretty good. Thank you, appreciate the compliments.
Awesome. I'm glad to hear everything's coming through well. I really don't know much about how all this tech stuff works. So
you can watch it after.
Oh, I do get to watch it after. Oh, that's going to be great. This is going to be on YouTube forever, in the analogs of YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
Coffee break. That's an important step. Alright, we're just going to kind of, since we're getting a little more into the detail-y areas, I'm going to kind of start to mix my paint just a bit thicker here. And we're just going to kind of continue down along any of the areas. I'll do these legs. I'll try to stay away from the tail because I'm probably going to use that as a holding point at some point in time, whether it be intentionally or unintentionally. So for now, I'll stay away from that area as well as those 2 furthest points on the wing. We're going to be doing a second coat or a second color of a graveyard bone on all of the stuff we've already painted brown after we do a quick wash. Doing the big stuff like this, if I were doing like a character or if I were doing something that I really wanted detailed, again, I would probably do a couple of stages of washes. For those who have seen my elf, there's like probably 6 or 7 different washes on there, but he also took me like 4.5 hours to do.
You got a great compliment, Chris. I don't know whose tag this is. but Chris equals the Bob Ross of minis.
Nice. We don't do happy trees, we do happy dragons. I mean, I guess they could be angry dragons, depending on how your party burst through the door, but maybe that could be our slogan instead of happy trees, angry dragons. I do appreciate that, though. Thank you very much. I don't know if I'll ever live up to his standards personally in my landscape painting career, but maybe. We all have to aspire to something, I suppose. And again, we're just going to kind of just touching along here. Really, it doesn't need to be super, super precise. Add a little bit more water to this, though. I will keep it over here on the other edge of my palette, just so it's a little further off to the side. That way I can kind of add the water as I see fit. Again, right through here, I want it a little more watery because I'm trying to pick out that light detail along the edge of his wing. We're really just drawing in all the lines of where we want all the colors to be. We can go through and blend and all that stuff in a little bit. But for now, we're just bulking out the majority of this mini. It is a huge mini to do. Granted, I didn't prime this. I know everybody's like, probably, oh my gosh. I know there's one person out there who's like, dude, you didn't prime the mini. Yep, I didn't. A lot of the WizKids stuff, you really don't. Reaper stuff, I do. And when I do, it really all depends on what I want the model to look like overall. I guess if you're going for a darker tone, typically I'll either do like a black. If you want it easy, do it black. If you're looking for a really good effect, a dark gray, I believe Reaper Mountain Gray is the color I typically use if I want a very dark mini. I just did that for all of my Space Wolves, actually. I did them all in like a gray. We're doing the fore part of his leg here, because if he were standing looking, this would all be red. If he were like laying down like a dog or a cat, that would be the top side of his leg. So the bottom side's actually going to be kind of tucked up underneath. But as long as you keep his foot in that like little back section, just to give yourself a little bit of variation, I find it really does make a better overall appearance to the mini. These little scales right here on the inside of the leg, I always kind of battle myself. Do I paint them? Do I paint them red? Do I paint them, you know, the underbelly color? I guess you can kind of just blend until you find that happy medium somewhere, is a good way to put that. I don't know. It's all really personal choice, a lot of this stuff. It all depends on what you want your mini to look like. I mean, I didn't have a super detailed plan as to how I wanted this guy to go. I actually wasn't really totally sure what we were going to be doing for the painting class, so I just brought all my stuff. If you guys could see the chair next to me, you guys would laugh. There's a ton of stuff on it, and it's only like half the stuff I brought in from my car, too. Anthony gave me a funny look when I walked in the door with like 6 boxes. But again, we're just kind of waiting. I'm pretty sure that wing is good to go, but for right now I'm just going to finish with what I have on my palette here, just so we don't really waste anything. We will all be covering this in red, so while the paint's there, we might as well use it. A little thicker in some spaces where I really want the detail to show through. That'll make it a little easier when it comes to later coats, because you're just really bulking out a lot of that color at this point in time. And starting to get into some of the little tricky spaces here. Hopefully my brush doesn't get in the way or my hand get in the way. I will have to flip him back over to do that little spot underneath of there, but I'm going to do that with a much tinier brush. Again, we're just kind of using like a base coating brush. One little trick, and I apologize to anybody whose stuff you're all about to steal. The makeup brushes. Yeah, your mom, your sister, your aunt. Makeup brushes actually make great dry brushes. So next time somebody goes to throw out that, like, I don't know, Maybelline or whatever brand they use, yeah, grab that brush before that hits the garbage and just tell them they don't need to ask questions for mini stuff. They wouldn't understand. Any kind of big fluffy fuzzy brush like that, apparently I can't talk anymore, that stuff works real great for dry brushing. So any of you ladies out there, or anybody who wears makeup, any kind of that stuff, I suppose you've got a one-up, oh no, a one-up on everybody else. And again, it's not really, you don't have to go super precise when you're doing these little edge details. Just kind of pick where you want the line to fade. There's really no, oh man, everybody's line has to be right here, or how come you did that row of scales on your dragon and I didn't? It doesn't matter. One more little dip of water here, use up the rest of this, and then we will go on to washing the underside of that wing. The one thing you're going to want to remember when you wash the underside of that wing is for a few seconds, until it starts to kind of harden up on the surface, you can't flip him back over, or all your wash is going to drain to the other side that you don't want it on. So we're kind of starting to get there. I mean, you can definitely see that he's kind of starting to turn very smog dragon-y-ish, much more so than the white guy that was in the box, or gray, I suppose. I think they use like a gray color. So I'll set him down real quick, wash my brush. Yes, I still dry them all off on my pant leg. My pants look like a rainbow. It's awesome. Everybody always is like, oh, look at the paint. And we're going to switch over to a wash brush, which I'm going to use this guy.
Did you, hey Chris, did you know that your character with the fox was featured on Reaper Live last month?
Really?
I might have to repeat that to you and get the camera on you, because if you guys would have saw his face just now.
Really? How did I not know about this?
Yep.
I mean, that's awesome. I'm super glad to hear that. I can't believe Reaper didn't contact me or something. That's funny.
There you go.
Alright, so we're gonna have to accommodate for cables and such. I'm just dipping this right out of the pot, not using a ton, but not really being super stingy with it either. Just kind of letting it do what it wants. You can see it starting to fill in all those leathery details of the wings. Again, I typically don't do too much of a highlight on the wings, because they're really kind of super shadowy and shaded anyway. A lot of what I'm going to focus on is going to be along these edges where the bone bridges are, and then I'll just fill in the rest kind of more willy-nilly, more so than anything. Again, you're going to want to, or at least I personally, choose to pull my brush in this direction so it all kind of pools up down here when I'm doing something that would be either upside down or an underside of something. I know his tail's about to get in the way, but I'm just trying to, at this point, stay inside of that wing pattern. A bit more on that one. And that about does it for that wing. Missed one little spot right there. Just kind of turn him, don't turn him over, but just kind of turn him around to make sure you got everything. Maybe one time real quick before you actually let it start to pool up. Just pull everything back to that edge. And we'll move on to the other wing. Again, starting, we're going to pull everything down. We're going to do mostly these ridges here, and then kind of fill in anything after. I do like to make this line fairly crisp, and you can already see it's really blending where the red and the brown kind of meet, because red and brown are really, on the color wheel, fairly similar colors. I mean, I won't lie, I didn't take a whole lot of art classes, and I went to a mechanic school for college, and they definitely did not teach us art theory working on cars. So I know they're somewhat similar. I know I believe red and green, the base colors, are for brown. But it really blends in well. The Reichland Flesh Shade I find is the easiest wash for browns. If you're looking for something that looks aged, I like Reichland Flesh Shade. Agrax Earth Shade is great if you're doing like a mini that you want, to look like he's been on an adventure, like apparently my elf and fox have that I didn't even know about. And if you want him to look like he's been outside for a long time, yes, Agrax Earthshade. But if you want it to look kind of natural, leathery, I use this a lot for harpies. I find that works great for their wings, those kind of guys. The Reaper Birdman mini, I think. Bird Warrior, Bird Guy. He was like the free mini last month or something. I did his wings in a similar tone. And again, that kind of really just overall, I feel like this wing is a little more light than the other wing, so we're going to try to balance that out. Just kind of throw a little extra in there. And I'll just kind of pull it back just to show everybody that that's about what we're working with. I feel it's a little dark right here, so I'm actually just going to take some off. Maybe move it to another spot. Wash is fairly easy to work with, fairly forgiving. And now that those are both pretty good, we're going to switch over to the belly scales. You can fill in that little spot where the little post goes if you want to. You can. I'm probably not going to. One fair warning, and I had it happen one time on another mini. I actually didn't fill in that spot with anything. And after I got the entire mini completed and painted, I went to put him on his post to make him look like he was flying, and you could actually see the reflection of that white from the primer that was originally used on the mini from the factory. You could see that through the post, and I really didn't like it, and I actually ended up covering the entire post in a Nuln Oil wash to try to make up for that. So try to keep that in mind. That could happen. This guy's big enough, and I've kind of come to the conclusion I actually like that darker shaded post, so I will probably do it on this guy anyway. I find it makes the post not really stand out so much. It almost looks too prominent if you don't do it. It really doesn't make it look like he's floating or flying. It really just kind of makes it look like he's just there and like standing on top of this weird thing that comes out of the ground. And I really don't personally care for that. But again, it's all personal preference. I know on the drones for the Tau guys it looks okay. I've done a few of those. Maybe it's a slightly different material with GW versus Reaper. I'm not 100% sure. I think the GW ones are a little more opaque. Or I suppose not opaque is how that works. They're not as opaque. Again, we're just going to kind of flesh out some stuff here. I see I got a little puddle going on right there, so I'll move that around. And before your wash really dries or hardens, you've got plenty of time to just make sure everything's where you want it to be. And this is all just going to overall turn into all the little shades and shadows. And I suppose somebody's going to do it. If anybody wants to do this scale right here, you could make him look like Smog. Make him have his little missing scale if you want to go that route with it. If your game is kind of set in more of a Tolkien setting and you want that whole Lonely Mountain theme. Might have to watch that movie tonight. I don't think my dad's ever seen The Hobbit. Blows my mind. So we're getting to a point here where the wash is kind of starting to tack up. You can see it's still running down towards the center of his wings, so we're still okay on that. I'm going to flip him over one time real quick just to check and make sure I got everything that I wanted to get. Again, we're going to do little dragon toe beans. This mini was like molded for that joke. And I will do a little bit around his feet down here. I'm just kind of using up the last of the Reichland flesh shavings on the top of my GW little pot here. Reaper does do okay with their washes. I haven't personally tried their washes that come in the containers. I probably should get on that. If anybody wants to give a little bit of feedback on those, or if you have used them, do they work as well as the GW ones? Do you still prefer the GW ones? I know I personally prefer the GW washes. I remember when they were a lot worse though. The late 90s was horrible for Games Workshop washes. They were very oily, and everything that you did with them looked like, it almost looked like it had Dawn dish soap on it. It had that kind of like sheen to it. Not great times. So, for just a split second here while I wash my brush and switch my colors, we're going to turn him upside down and let him do his drying thing. Coffee break. Oh no, the music stopped as well. Both fixed. At this point, I'm probably going to try to carefully continue on with the red, do some more of that outside stuff on all that. At this point in time, if you wanted to, it's kind of just a if you should choose to go that direction. You could put him on his base and use that to hold him. Kind of optional. I can do it for those that would like to see that. Might help in the end. Just be careful when you're doing this now, because your wash may, if you did put a lot of wash on there, it may tend to run down that, but for now it'll give a good base to kind of hold on to him with and do his thing. I guess here's another question for everybody that's watching. Me personally, I don't care for the little spell effect things. I mean, I will paint them for you in this tutorial to show you guys how to do some clear stuff as well. I've always wanted to touch on that. But I guess I just want to know, do you guys use them? I find WizKids did do a really good job with this, and they put the little tiny hole up in the top of his mouth where you can't see it if you don't use it. I personally don't care for them. I feel like they get in the way in the games, in real life. What's your opinions on that? And I do have a little bit of wash that's starting to pool up down here on this one wing that I'm just going to pick a little bit up on. Clean that up just a little bit and get ready to switch back over to the red here. We're going to go again with the fresh blood, just continuing what we were working on for a base coat. Now that we can see where the lines are, it'll make kind of doing this a little easier.
I have both cameras going now, so let's see.
Nice. As long as they don't see me taking a coffee break. Alright.
Some great compliments coming through.
Back to all this, we're going to do, again, get it. All I'm doing is just a couple little drops just to kind of pre-prime my palette. This is just one of those little $1 crayon box holder things from Walmart. I buy them in like a big giant bulk pack for holding on to minis and sprues and accessories and all that stuff on my desk for the little bit of tameness that I do have on my art desk. It's a nightmare for those that have never seen it. And basically I just kind of use them as like a semi-wet palette. I find they do work okay. My personal favorite is actually to use a tile from like Lowe's or something, because the tile doesn't absorb water. I mean, it will dry over time. It is a paint. It is going to dry, but I find the tile gives you a lot of working time. And again, right now I'm just kind of going through here and just really trying to stay away from that brown as I'm doing this. But right now the one thing I'm not worried about is hitting this, I don't know, we'll call it a mane, we'll call it a spine, we'll call it whatever you would like to call it. I'm also open to suggestions on these. I personally am going to do them the same color as the dragon on this because I want his horns to really stand out. But you could do them either brown or red, I suppose, would be okay. Again, it's all up to you. It's what, I mean, if you really wanted to paint this dragon blue, you could. So again, I'm holding my brush almost level, I guess, not with the surface, so that I don't go too far out. And it almost adds a highlight without even adding the highlight intentionally. It leaves that little space in between so you don't have to go so crazy because you already did a little bit of a shading when you did the first original wash. So we're just kind of fleshing out, and the one spot that I'm going to want to make sure I don't touch is his eye right there because it is very, very tiny and I want that detail to remain. So I will try to avoid that if possible. If you can't, not a big deal, just remember it's there. You will remember it's there when you do the wash. It'll kind of pop back up, but I try to avoid putting a lot of paint in the eye as I'm doing my base coats because that's the one spot where it really does count. There's a lot of little details in there, a lot of little spaces. Just try to make it easier on yourself, I guess, really, is all you're doing. These little horns, I'm not really intentionally going around them, but I guess because they're already brown, I can kind of slightly avoid them. I don't have to paint over them, so why not save yourself just that little extra while you're doing it. I will, for right now, avoid his mouth because I'm actually going to do that a different color. I don't know about you guys personally, but I find my red dragons, I always like to do them with green mouths. I find it really makes them pop. It just really does. I did it on my, the Pathfinder red dragon when I first did him, when Anthony and I first kind of started getting into all this and discussing this. I had done the Pathfinder red dragon with a green tongue, and it came out absolutely great. My green beholder has a purple tongue. I just always do crazy colors for the tongues. Anybody else do that, or is everybody kind of standard issue pink tongue type people? I suppose would be another good question. How's everybody doing with their minis? Everybody coming along okay? Anybody have any other questions as we're going through doing this, or?
Abby says hi.
Hello, Abby.
She's on.
Good luck with the lizard man. I suppose that's the benefit of running into me from time to time in public. If you do happen to see me, don't be afraid to say hi. I may or may not carry minis with me in my car at all times, and you may or may not get one.
So we have some comments coming up with, I must have missed this question. It said, I've seen some that have used cool, and I will learn the terminology of OSL. Object source lighting, I'm assuming.
Yep.
Right? Awesome. With this model, but doing real with fire is really hard. That was from Margaret. Miniature Mayhem. I've never used the effects unless I buy more than one mini, then I do both versions.
Yep. Okay, when I went to get back to you on that one, when I actually did my beholder, I actually found that the eyes, the little I'll call them eye branches. The little eye branches actually were carved well enough and they fit in well enough that I actually ended up painting all 8 of them that came with the beholder, and I can actually swap them out if I wanted to, which I found was really nice. You could do that with this guy too, I suppose. I know it does fit in there fairly snugly. I guess my one concern would be over the course of time, is that going to wear the paint away from the inside of the dragon's mouth, whatever color you do. But yep, if I bought more than one, I actually almost did that with the beholder because I do really like, out of all the spell effects, the lightning spell that the beholder comes with. I find it just goes over his shoulder and just looks good. Sorry, had to try to touch that one little tiny spot inside of there. between all the cameras and the cords, I really couldn't quite see it. Again, we're just kind of making, again, you don't have to be super precise when you're doing the inside of that. I am kind of holding the one wing back a little bit as I'm doing it, just to make sure that there is color going in there. Well, a lot of this is actually going to be filled in when you do the shade or the wash or whatever step you want to call it. When you do that, it's actually going to fill a lot of that in.
Hi, William.
Hello.
So now I know who Miniature Mayhem is. He also put on here, he always tries to use purple hue for the toughness.
Okay.
Or is that toughness? I can't. Yep. And then Margaret, she did a neon green in her black dragon's mouth for a kind of acid effect.
Yep, that's a good one. Going for like that Snow White black dragon with the green venom fire. I've always found, and I don't know if it's just a subliminal thing to that movie because it was made so long ago, but I find green is always a very awesome evil fire color. Maybe we could do that with this guy. Maybe we'll do a green fire effect coming out of him. I mean, it just said he was a fire dragon. Nobody ever said he couldn't breathe green fire. I guess let's do a quick poll on that and see what the general public would like to think. Would you rather see his spell effect, which I will paint? Would you rather see it green or would you rather see it orange? And again, we're just continuing along here, just making sure that all this is base coated fairly well. We'll check our wings. Everything seems to be drying okay under there. All looking good. Starting to really come together now. You can kind of see a lot of the shadows and the shades. And at this point, this is kind of where you start to look back at him and you go, oh wow, it actually is starting to turn into a dragon. I mean, I guess it was always a dragon, technically.
Oh, hey, Bev.
Hello.
Green. Oh, so far, wow. Okay. It's popping up green, green, go green.
All right. I was really kind of hoping you guys were going to say that, because I really kind of want to do it green now. I'll probably do green with like a very, very bright yellow dry brush, but before I do the yellow dry brush, I'll just do a green and a white, and then I'll let the yellow kind of stick to the white after, is how I would potentially do that. I suppose it would be the same way if you were trying to just do like a regular fire effect. You would, I find anything base coated in white really, really pops, and if you're going for that like super hot, like intense, anything white. And that's the other thing you want to remember too, is when you're doing flames, everything is inverted. White is actually the hottest, as opposed to what you would want to think would be like a red would be the hottest. It's not. Science moment. Or I suppose just somebody that owns a wood stove moment. I suppose while we're just kind of doing this and fleshing this all out, how's everybody doing during this whole staying at home quarantine thing? Everybody doing okay? Who is, alright, here's the real question. Gonna have a real moment here, real talk. Who is actually getting done some of their mini backlog while all this is happening? Anthony's over here nodding his head like, I know everybody that comes in this store has got a pile of minis at home.
Oh, yes.
So who is actually being proactive and using this time to get done some of your backlog, as opposed to just kind of still looking at it like I potentially am? I suppose I get a dragon done today. I got those mushroom guys done the other day. I think I did like 4 or 5 of those guys.
Let's see. Well, Chris is getting some more stuff, but everybody knows the joke on this one is my blue dragon, my backlog, still in backlog. You can all laugh now.
Yeah, ask him about his Grey Knights.
I know what you're talking about in the Grey Knights.
Yeah, ask him about his Grey Knights. If Anthony ever gives you guys slack about not doing your backlog, just ask him how his Grey Knights are coming.
Yep. They're
Sorry,
still gray.
Anthony.
They're still gray.
Sorry, buddy. Trust me, I have a giant pile of shame on my desk as well. Some of them are half painted, some of them are not. Now that we have this guy on his base, again, now that we have a little more freedom to kind of touch and move and do things, I'll just bulk these out real quick. Just to say we can get a coating on them. And maybe after this we'll do a quick wash.
So read some of these comments coming back at you. Before that, we have you ever tried just washes on the effects?
I have, actually. Interesting little thing, and I'm kind of glad somebody brought that up. Thank you for bringing that up. I meant to kind of forewarn people that, and it's only happened to me one time, and I went to use a wash. It was actually on my gelatinous cube, and I nearly ruined him, and I'm not sure what happened to this day. I haven't been able to replicate it since, and my shades and washes have been working fine. It actually turned him completely opaque, and you couldn't even see through him anymore. I wasn't totally sure what happened, so that is just a forewarning that may happen. With most of these guys, I have tended to, since that time, kind of gravitated more towards the glazes from Citadel when I'm doing the clear effects, which I do have with me, so we can kind of try that. But yeah, just a fair warning, I have one time done a gelatinous cube, and it pretty much completely made it so that you couldn't even see that little ring inside of him. I wasn't quite sure what happened on that one or why it did it. I shook the can or the bottle really, really well, like I do everything else, and it just didn't work out that time. Sometimes it happens.
So about that backlog, we have.
Uh-oh.
Let's see. Margaret says she's getting through some of the box of shame and entering too many contests. A hint. I like that word contest, by the way. Beverly is she's painting her mooselings.
Nice.
William, he's done 2 so far, and then back to, we have Margaret saying the contrast paints also seem to work nice for spell effects.
I would potentially have to try that at some point in time. I know Anthony's over here chuckling already because he's just kind of waiting for what my answer is going to be. I personally do not own any of the Citadel contrast paints. It's just a personal thing, so I may have to take your word for that one. Nothing against them if you do use them, don't get me wrong. I mean, if that's what you're shooting for and you want to just bulk out an entire like giant unit of guys, or you want to kind of make life easier on yourself, that is definitely the way to do it. But I will add to that, my elf would not have turned out like he looks had I used contrast paints. So I suppose it really it's what you're going for again. I mean, this guy's just like table presence, like big giant dragon thing, sweet. All your players are like, yeah, woohoo, we get to fight a thing, doing stuff. I mean, that's really all you're shooting for this guy. So if you wanted to do contrast paints and just bulk him out, you definitely could. It wouldn't be hard at all. I, again, have never personally used contrast paints, but whatever works, I suppose. We're just going to kind of go through and pick out the scales along his wings. I do these the same color as I do the body, and I do continue that to the underside as well. At this point in time, I'm going to carefully remove him from this base. If I can
paint him on there.
just so that I have a better hold. I'm going to grab him by his 2 horns, and I'm going to hold him by his tail, just so I don't touch anything in between. I apologize if you do not have the spacing in between your fingers to do all that. One other way that I have found, and I guess it was kind of an older technique that I used to use when painting model cars and stuff as a kid, is I would actually, and adult warning on this one, I guess, the whole safety thing. If you actually take a T-pin and carefully heat it up with either a lighter or a match and just carefully push it into somewhere discreet, like the bottom of a foot on your Mini, that gives you a very good place to hold. Normally, I would be using those super awesome Games Workshop mini holders, but unfortunately with this guy, he's just so large that it would almost just get in the way even more. And with all the wires and cameras and whatnot right now, I think minimum is best for what I'm working with. But again, it's whatever you want to do. If you find holding it with a GW holder works best, if you find a tack works best, whatever works for you. I can't emphasize that enough, really, with anything. Whatever works for you is what works. I mean, when I first started doing this, all we had for inspiration was a monthly Games Workshop magazine that they would put out, and other than that, you just kind of sat around in the game stores and just talked to all your friends about it. That is one thing I have to admit that the beauty of the internet has brought around, is it does make it a lot easier to talk with other people that are painting minis, as evident here. Alright, we're going to carefully, his wings are starting to dry really, really well. Again, they're not like way down here at the points where everything's all built up, so that worked really well, just kind of holding him and making sure that we didn't completely leave him right side up when he dried on that. I will eventually here switch over to a little smaller brush to do some of these finer details, but for right now I'm just kind of trying to bulk out the mane of this, and then I'm going to wash him and may potentially take a quick break.
Sounds good.
Once we get him somewhat fully ready to go, give you guys a little bit of time to either catch up or get to where you're at. I know obviously not everybody has done this before, not everybody's done this on this scale before, so I'm sure there are a few people whose hands are completely covered in red and brown paint out there right now. Feel no shame, I've been there. Everybody doing red, or is anybody doing a crazy color with their dragon? Is everybody even doing dragons? If you're not painting a dragon, let me know what you're painting right now. And again, we're just kind of trying to flesh all this out real quick. Doesn't need to be super precise, but our red dragon is definitely starting to take form. A little bit of water because we're getting into some of the finer details on here, or at least getting towards some of the edges of some of these details, and I don't want it to go too far over. This is one of the spots you want to be very careful. I'm laying my brush, you can almost see it, the brush tip is actually beyond what I'm painting, and I'm just using the middle of the brush really to just kind of fill in all those spaces. And what that'll actually do is create a line on the other side. And where that line is, it just gives you a good finishing point. And you can move that line based off, and again, I mean, the tip is way over the edge. It's not, and you're not going to get any on that brown. You don't have to super worry about it making a huge mess. We'll make it a little thicker right there. If you want more control over your paints, make them a little thicker. If you want them to have a more even color and a more even smoothness to them, trim them down a little bit. That's why, again, there really is no, it's supposed to be done this way, it's supposed to be done that way. If you want your paint to flow better, make it a little thinner. If you want a little more detail, crispness, and control, make it a little thicker. I'm just running down the inside edge of the scales on his wing right now. It's a little thinner through here because I'm trying to pick up some of the little spaces in between there. We perfectly got those little scales. That actually worked out really well. Sometimes you do that. Sometimes you surprise yourself and you're like, oh, hey, that little edge of the brush caught that just perfect. I'm just going to roll with it.
I'm just testing something before.
Oh, I'm not sure.
So when you go take your break?
I'm not going to do it.
Oh, yeah, you're out of the shot. Sorry.
Sorry about that. I was told by my director I was out of screen. Again, it seems like every time I go off screen, I'm trying to get this little area right here. If you guys can see that, there's a little tiny. Oh, there we go. I got it. Hey. Right there. Perfect. So red dragon, green spell effect. I think we can handle that.
That's what looks like the consensus is. Answer some of the other questions here that you had asked about contrast. We have someone had bought 2 bottles of contrast paints and they think they've used it maybe a total of 3 times. But again, this particular person likes to do the classic.
Yeah, if you're trying to go for that classic look, it's really just easier. I mean, I guess that's my only drawback with the contrast paints, just being totally honest here for a moment. I almost find they oversell and they underwhelm a little bit. You see all these awesome pictures of these painted boxes on these like GW figures and stuff when you're looking at them on the shelf, and unfortunately, none of those pictures and none of those minis are painted using any type of contrast paint. And I just feel like, that's the look everybody wants. That's why you bought that box of minis, because you were like, oh man, look at these guys, they're awesome. And if you want that paint job, unfortunately, you're not going to get it with contrast paint. Again, if you're just trying to bulk out a giant army of zombies, do it. If you're just trying to bulk out anything, contrast paints are great, but they do have a limited use. And unfortunately, for me personally, it's not on my tabletop. I suppose if I were going to use them for terrain, that would be an easy way to bulk out terrain quickly, would be with contrast paints. I suppose I haven't tried that, and I potentially could. Maybe that's going to be my excuse to buy a couple contrast paints finally. I just can't see myself using them on minis. At least not for, like this kind of type of thing. I guess if you really want it to be either a centerpiece, or if you want it to kind of look very special, I would not recommend them. I will go through right here real quick and just kind of touch the inside of his mouth, just to, break that stigma of you can't do it or you should avoid it. It really doesn't matter. And at this point, just going to kind of make sure everything is coated to where I like it. And then we'll move on to that real quick wash, and then we can pick back up from there once that dries a little bit. Because that will take a second to dry, unfortunately, because this is a large model. So the wash, when you do the overall wash on his body, will take a moment to dry. I know that is just a little fang, but I'm still going to paint it red for right now anyway. Just, don't be too hard on yourself when you're painting your minis, I guess is the best way to put it. I mean, in all reality, you're way more of a critic of yourself than anybody else is ever going to be. I've been doing this for a long, long time, and I've never, ever in my life heard anybody else call somebody out on a bad paint job on a mini. You're your worst critic ever. nobody else is going to worry about it. Everybody else is going to be like, oh, hey, sweet, man, you bought, a pre-painted or, a self-painted Mini. Everybody starts somewhere. They're not all going to be perfect. Don't worry about it. I find that's what leads to the biggest box of shame on the corner of your desk, is just you being like, well, I didn't do this right, so I'm just going to stop doing it. A little bit on his toes here. A little bit right along the inside edge there. And again, I'm not going to be too overly concerned about any of these like edges bumping into some of that brown, because I'm going to do a Reichland Flesh Shade wash over the dragon as well. I find it just looks better with red. It kind of makes it more of like a brown, more of a natural shadowy tone. I find the black makes it too stark, and it almost makes it almost very comic book style cartoony, and I really personally just don't want to shoot for that on this movie. If you would like to, there's nothing wrong with that. If that's what you are going for or would like to go for, that's the way to do it. Personally, though, I am going to Reichland Flesh Shade this guy because I feel like it's going to make things a lot better. I guess what I just did for the couple people that did notice that, you can kind of fix your mistakes. Your finger, while paint is wet, is the best eraser, and I can even kind of show you just intentionally. Like, I will put a streak of red right there, and it's gone. As long as it's wet, if you mess up, just rub it off. As long as the undercoat is dry, it's not going to hurt. So again, don't be too hard on yourself, and just kind of just paint your Mini. These I'm going to leave white for now because I will eventually be turning those all into bone. I believe so far the only comment or the only suggestion we've gotten for the central ridge on his back was gold, and it's kind of looking like we're going to go that direction with it in a second here. I will add a little bit more red to my palette because I have to do the other arm on the wing, or the scaly part of the other side of the wing. And then we should almost be ready to give this guy a bath. I kind of feel like it's going to be a pretty good overall look. A little bit of green, a little bit of gold, a little bit of red. Anybody else feeling like a Christmas theme going on here? We have like a red, green, and gold, like Christmas winter dragon. Right here, I'm pressing against this. I'm actually starting my brush up here, but as I push down, the brush naturally wants to curve into that low point. Just kind of let the brush do it for you if you can. Is a good way to make sure that you get into all those little details. I don't know if you guys could pick that up on the camera, but again, just like right in the middle, and just as you pull down, push just a little bit of pressure down, and it'll fill into that little side area. Kind of makes, like again, doing it here, you start in the middle and push down. I typically don't start on the edge of a piece, because I find that's where you go over a little too far, and then you've got a red dot in the middle of his wing. So we're just going to follow along this ridge here. Again, I mean, my brush tip is over his wing, but it's because I'm holding my brush. It's almost very hard to see, but I'm holding it almost level with his wing. And all that does is just allow you to touch that edge without going into the middle. Right here, I actually got to kind of carefully do this because the wire from the camera gets in my way a little bit. But that's on me, not on you. You guys don't have camera wires to work around. Again, I'm definitely having a lot more respect for the YouTubers that do this. Not that I didn't before, but it's definitely a lot more than just that like 1 hour YouTube video you watch. And we're getting to a point here where I'm almost content with how this is all going. Down into there just a little bit. I'm going to have to thin that down just a smidge to get into those little ridges on the scales. When you're thinning your paint, it's actually easier to tell minis than it is on WizKids minis because they are pre-primed with a little bit of that Vallejo Army paint or whatever brand they're using now. They do come pre-primed, so it is almost harder to tell on a WizKids mini when your paint is too thin, because on a Reaper mini it'll just bead up and the paint just won't stick at all. Whereas with a WizKids mini you kind of have to, I guess, feel it out and see if as it dries it's too thin. With the WizKids minis you really want to watch your opacity, or opacity, however you would pronounce that technically. Again, I'm a mechanic, not an English major. Maybe those will be our 2 trivia questions for our next painting class when all this does start getting back going again, is what was my previous job and what was my cat's name? Maybe we'll make some sort of contest out of that. Right here, I'm just not super satisfied with the coating on this wing, personally, so I'm just going to go through and just give them a light, thin coat, just to blend that in a little better. You can kind of see the difference. I almost made like a upside down V shape right here, and you can see in the middle there where it's kind of a little too thin. I'm not super happy with that, and I feel like that could be a little bit darker. If you wanted to, and you kind of intentionally did that, I guess this is kind of where those contrast paints really come into play, is it would almost naturally shade it because the contrast paints are thinner, so you would have a lighter spot up here and like a darker spot in the recesses. But I mean, I'll add that highlight after with a dry brush. It's really not that difficult to do, and I can control what color and shade I want it to be. Whereas with the contrast paints, you just got to kind of go with whatever the contrast paint does for you.
So while you're finishing that up there, Chris, we have, let's see, well, hi Jolene. Jolene's on now.
Hello.
She's going with a blue dragon.
All right. I knew somebody out there was doing it. I could feel it.
And let's see, do you have a preference when using metallic paints, like Reaper versus GW?
For a long time I did, and I guess this was just kind of me being stubborn. I used to have, and I don't even know if they still make it anymore, it was one of the old GW screw top pots, and it was a gold shade that they had done, and I really liked that gold, and for as long as I had it I used it, and I guess I just kind of stuck with the GW gold. But recently I have actually found from Reaper, they make this color that comes in I believe it's the Dungeon Dwellers pack that Anthony does keep in stock, and there is a gold color in there that is called Cursed Gold, and I have fallen in love with that color. That is now my new favorite shade of gold, is Reaper's Cursed Gold.
It's not in stock. Will be in stock next week.
Okay, apparently we'll be in stock next week. But it is available in the Dungeon Dwellers paint kit as well.
Ah, there you go. Let's see.
Hashtag product placement. This video is not sponsored.
Sponsored by AC and Hidden Passage Art Studio.
Right? Not sponsored by Reaper. That would be cool, but goals for down the road, I suppose. I mean, hey, that one guy did it there that does the Miniatures Mondays. I used to watch him before he was famous on Reaper. And again, we're just kind of going through and making sure that everything is really fairly well covered at this point in time. Probably going to take a quick break here after I wash him real quick. I got to wait for that one wing that I just touched to dry, but starting to definitely look like an overall red dragon.
Yes, yes.
Getting there, coming along nicely. For this step, when I do the wash, I will probably place him back onto this base, just that way he does stay upright, because at this point that does matter. With the wings, I know we wanted to do him upside down, but with this wash, we would want to keep him upright so that it actually sits like he would sit. Anthony was kind enough to give me another jug of water. And at this point, I think we're good on the fresh blood red, unless I see something that I want to touch up, so we'll put that kind of off to the side, as well as leather brown. And the Milne oil I have out, I don't really think I'm going to use it again. I think I'm just going to kind of go with the Reichland Flesh Shade as well on this one. I think it'll just blend a little easier. It might even make some of that underbelly a little bit darker. But I'm going to try to stay away from as much of that as I can. At this point in time, I guess anybody got any comments, suggestions, anything you'd like to add at this point, or any questions? While I'm just kind of waiting for this guy to dry for a second, and we'll throw some wash on him, and I can answer some questions during that.
And there's a time delay, so sometimes it takes a little longer.
Yeah. That's almost getting there. There's a little spot right here that's still a little damp. I could probably work around that though and just kind of start to get along his body and his head. And I'm again making sure he was firmly placed into this base, just so he doesn't rock and roll and wobble all over the place. And again, Reichland Flesh. Same color we did on the wings, we're just doing it on the scales now. Using the same, in fact the exact same brush that I used when I was doing the underside of the wings the first time. And we're just going to use it right straight out of the pot again. It's make sure we get in all these little areas here. When I do these guys, one thing that I do when I'm doing the scales is I do add a little bit of a shade kind of right here, but you really you want to not add what they call tide marks when you're doing your washes, which again we'll go over with another highlight after this. But for right now, you're just basically filling in and getting all those little scale shadows. Don't go super crazy with the wash, but you don't need to be sparing with it either. It is a large model. It is going to take a lot of wash. I will do the bottoms of his feet, I guess, where his little toe beans are. Just because that would be a little darker spot, because it would be underneath of him when he's standing there. This is where you kind of want to start to think about your light source. You want to think about where your highlights are going to be coming from, where your shadows are going to be. Anything that's going to be below him or under him is going to be much darker, so I may add a little bit of extra wash right in through there until it starts to come back out from underneath of him. You will want to be careful of that little post if you are not going to do what I'm going to do, and you're going to go ahead and wash it over with a black anyway. You will want to be careful, but I am not going to be careful because I am going to be painting that post a black wash anyway. Again, that's just personal preference. I find it makes them look less like they're floating on a stick, and it kind of more makes them look like he's actually flying, because your base is going to be a dark color anyway, or mine personally are. Just making sure to get all these little tiny spaces in here, really. Again, there's almost like a natural crease right here in the mini. I will probably bring the wash up to that point and stop it there, because where his chest is, that there would be obviously a little more light coming through where his chest would be. That would be more exposed to whatever natural sunlight we had going on.
What color wash do you have again?
Regular Flesh Shade for this one. And this is exactly how I did my Pathfinder Red Dragon, and it fills in all these scales beautifully. I mean, you can kind of see I've got a little bit of a like drop on the end of the brush, but not quite a full drop. I will do underneath of his neck right here a little bit just to kind of darken that in as well, because that's going to be a naturally shaded spot. And basically just put that little like half drop on your mini somewhere and just kind of spread it around. Spread the love. It's mini bath time. Any spaces you missed, anything that you left white, thankfully with the Reikland Flesh Shade will kind of turn a natural brown color anyway. So it really, I suppose it's kind of like contrast paint in a way. I did not just say that shades are contrast paints, or maybe I did, but I won't admit it.
But it is recorded now.
But it is recorded, so
we'll play back.
I guess it's on record. It does work a lot like the contrast paints. It's basically the same thing. And again, we're just going to kind of make sure that the hidden spaces and the stuff that would naturally be shadowed is naturally shadowed. Fill in under his neck, fill in like just that little lower jaw part for those who are painting the Red Dragon and painting along. That bottom jaw, I'm really going to make sure that that is very well filled in. That's going to be rather dark. Especially if we're going to be adding the spell effect on this one, you're really going to want that lower jaw to be a lot darker than you think you would. It's going to be hidden by that spell effect, and it'll almost make it more dramatic if the spell effect is really very highlighted and everything else is, I don't want to say dull, but everything else is kind of dulled down. At this point, you kind of want to start to think about what your focal point would be. Is it going to be the dragon? Is it going to be that spell effect? Where do you want your audience's eye to be immediately drawn to? A little bit in the mouth area here, just to make sure that that upper jaw has a coat on it. And then, I believe all the scales are pretty well good. I'll run a couple little quick passes down his back. I would like that spine area to be very well defined, because we are going to be doing a color change from the red to that either gold or yellow or whatever color we decide on here in the end. This lower side of his tail, you're going to want to be careful how much wash you put along there, because that's going to be one of the spots where it's going to want to naturally pool up. So just try not to put too much in there from the get-go, or it could potentially turn into a mess later on. Same thing with the inside edge of that wing. It's all going to want to pool up very low, so just try to be careful when you're doing that. I'm going to touch the underside of his front leg real quick while I'm up here. And again, just a quick little pass along the inside edge of that wing. I do like to tend to do that because it is, again, a spot where there's going to be a color change, and any of those places I like to make a little overly dramatic. We'll go through and touch the tip of his tail here quick, just to make sure there's no paint blobs or anywhere where it's really pooling up excessively. That's all you really want to watch with your washes, is just how much and where it's pooling up. We're going to do the inside of his wing here now, and all it does is just pick out all those little scales that you didn't have to go through and paint individually. You could. I have. It takes a long time. It looks awesome, but it takes forever. And then this is that other spot that I'm going to want to be careful how much wash I actually apply, because it's all going to want to run down the inside of that wing and pool up right on that edge of his body down in there. So be very careful with that. And again, this is a large model. You're going to use a lot more wash than you would think. Just try to not go way overtone with it. When you're doing washes, if you're trying to fill in all these little spaces, like all these little folds in the wing, again, you're going to want to go across with your brush. It makes it way smoother of a transition, and it fills in all those little spaces and leaves some of that wash behind in the gaps. And we'll just continue that sideways motion right up to the ridge on that wing, and then we can turn him and do the other side. Same thing, we're going to go across it kind of at a sideways angle almost. That way you leave a little bit more in those ridges and less on the highest points. That's really where your wash and your shade comes into play. This is going to fill in all those little low spaces for you. And again, you're going to want to watch down here in the corners to make sure it's not pooling up excessively. That is the main key when doing washes, is to don't let it pool up too much. So again, when I go to do these little points around where the wing is, where it comes to like that little spine there, or horn, or whatever you would like to call it, when it gets to that area, I'm just going to be very careful how much I use. If I find I've got too much, you can just go back through, soak up a little bit with the tip of your brush, and put it back up on the top. It will all work its way back down. Don't forget this little ridge on the inside here, where it did the one on the other side, but just don't forget this side as well.
Yeah, Abby threw in there, she didn't really have a backlog except for the last 2 dice dudes until this started. Now she got some more minis.
Again, I'm just going through and picking out any areas that I feel may have been a little lacking, like in between these little scales right here. Again, sideways motion when doing your washes. Sorry, I just bumped the camera. The whole world just shook. And again, we're going with that sideways motion just to try to leave a lot more of that wash behind. Going down in, making sure that that neck area is done. We're kind of going in at him from the top now. And making sure that all this behind the head is done. I'm going to post a picture so people can actually see what we're working with here and trying
so they know it's not my hands. Maybe they think I'm painting it and you're just talking.
Maybe that is so.
But we know that's not true.
I was going to say, for the record, I'm pretty sure they saw the tattoos on my arm,
right.
So good luck with that one. Again, we're just going through here, making sure that this is kind of in a more sideways motion to fill in any of those little spaces. That'll give you that real leathery look to his wing. Again, the one thing you're going to want to watch for is that little pocket down inside there. There's one little pool on the inside of his leg right here. Just check your mini once in a while as you're going through, making sure that he's not getting too saturated. If he is, it's not a big deal, just move it around. It's all still fairly wet. When it dries, fair warning, if your wash does dry before you go to try to touch it, it will actually leave a clear space. It will actually remove any of the paint that you have on there, so just be careful when doing that. And again, just going through, making sure everything looks okay here. And I'm going to finish up this last wing, and then I think we're going to have to take a let the wash shade dry break. this will take a minute to dry because there was quite a bit put on. Unfortunately, there really is no way to like super do this, dry it instantly. A hair dryer does speed things up a little bit, but I do kind of recommend against that because I have actually seen cases where it will make the paint dry awkwardly. It'll almost dry one spot out too much before it would naturally dry on its own. So I really don't totally recommend that, but try at your own risk if you're really super impatient. And I think all we have to do is just that one little inside ridge on that wing, and we've got them pretty well covered. And again, I'm going to just lightly press on the brush, not starting at the edge, but letting the tip of the brush find its way to the edge. I did notice one little spot that I missed. And just go through and just check everything. And we still have a couple layers to go. We have to do a little bit of a dry brushed highlight over all this, and then we can go through and really start picking out some of the super detailed stuff. Again, on a model this large, you really don't need to go too crazy with the tiny details because he's going to have such a board presence anyway, but it does always look awesome when you do it. So I suppose before we let any of this dry, anybody have any quick questions before we go to break here?
Let's see. First few times I use washes. Just looking for questions. Got just some comments. Some people saying first time they used washes, they applied way too much, and they used it was Nuln oil for every color. It was a mess.
It happens. My first mini was not pretty.
Someone made a comment earlier, oh my god, Tide marks are my bane.
Yep.
I guess as long as you don't eat them.
That's true. I think those are pods, though.
Right?
No, Tide marks, the best way to avoid Tide marks is just like if you have very little wash on your brush to a point where it's almost like a dry brush consistency, that would be the time to kind of just like use the last of that wash to just touch up the edge of it like I'm kind of doing lightly on this base, and it'll fan out your Tide marks if you're careful enough with it, but it's kind of a 50-50 thing. That's really like a luck of the draw. If you got lucky enough to do it, awesome. I probably wouldn't try it again.
Take your break, Chris.
Sure.
Okay. Hey folks, it's me. So Chris is gonna go take a break. That was painting for over almost 2 hours non-stop, Chris. Thanks. And so while the dragon's drying here a little bit, definitely appreciate everybody showing some support here, doing this with us our first time. Yep. And so just wanted to throw a few things out there. What would you like to see Chris paint next? If you have some ideas, some suggestions, send them to us. That'd be great, because of course we'd like to do this again. Second thing would be I'd like to do a contest for everybody. There's a good chunk of people online, and there'll probably be more people watching this video afterwards. And what we like to do is a painting contest that will start today, and it does not count your red dragon today, sorry folks, but it will be we want to do a Reaper mini, so anything about this size, okay, so $7 and under mini, it'll be a free painting contest, and you'll have all week to do that. Now of course if you don't have any Reaper minis, definitely give the store a call. You can go to our site. I'm still trying to get as many items up online as possible, but I'll just give you our site here, so you can definitely go to our web store and we can try to get as many Reaper Minis on there as soon as possible. But anyway, I just want to do a contest, a free contest for you folks, show some support to you. And the winner of the contest, of course, we want to give something away, and it'll be a $20 gift certificate to the store, okay, that you can use to the winner. So what do you have to do? Again, it'll be a small Reaper Mini, $7 or under. You will send us your finished product by next Sunday at noon, okay? You can either email it to us, you can message us on Facebook, any way like that, to get that picture to us, and take a couple pictures, okay, a front and back, so your two best shots of your Mini, and we'll get it over to us as soon as possible. We'll see how that works. I'm gonna check chat here and see anybody else. $7 and under, yes, Margaret. So a small Reaper Mini that we're trying to shoot for. So yes, like a player character size would work. Can be a little monster, can be a character. Oh, and my apologies. Do want to make sure it is a plastic Mini, so not metal. We'll keep everybody in the same category of plastic Reaper Mini. Let's see, so we have a question going back to the spine. That'll be for Chris. Would we leave the spines unpainted or are they white? Well, Chris will be working on the spines right now. We're looking at votes on what you wanted the spine to be. More questions, keep shooting them over to me. So yes, I'll show you the sizes for the contest I just announced. They have 1 week to do a free Reaper Mini contest from AC. So here's another one, little character, townsfolk. And again, if you don't have them, we have them, and just hit us up and we'll figure out how to get one to you. But you have 1 week, and the deadline will close at noon next Sunday. Looks like Chris is coming back.
I'm not allowed to enter this contest, for the record.
But can you paint one for me? No, that wouldn't be fair. Let's see. And watch for our Facebook page. I'll throw some behind the scenes pics.
By behind the scenes, he means the giant mess we've created.
Yes, we will get a lot better with all this. Throwing it together. And we're still practicing our social distancing here. And hope everybody is safe and well at home. Great question. Do you need a pic of the Mini unpainted as well, or just painted? We have a great community, a trustworthy community, so I hope that you guys take this week to actually paint one, not a previously painted one. And the last day of the entry will be next Sunday, so that's April 12th at noon. So we'll need all the pictures in either emailed to us or instant message to us, and by noon. Okay.
Got our glaze.
You need a new one?
Yep.
Okay. So what glaze are we doing?
Way Watcher Green. We'll see how this goes. Let's start with this guy quick. is I'm going to take a little bit of blue tack, like the poster tack stuff that you can get at Walmart or Office Max or any of that, and I'm actually going to stick this lightly into it, just so that it kind of holds onto it for me. Again, the one thing you're going to want to remember when you're doing these is that the lightest point is actually going to be here, not here. This will be the darker point going into light. So, just go ahead and lightly start painting some of this on. Everything working? All the cameras?
Everything's working just fine. But I'm just waiting for the comments.
It's not a contrast paint. It's a glaze. Putting that out there.
Keep it clean, folks. Sorry, Chris.
There's a lot of comments I could make too.
You want to get kicked off YouTube already, day one?
Yeah, right. I suppose the best PG-13 way to put it is there's just no right way to eat a banana.
Oh, jeez.
Again, we're just kind of making sure that there's just an overall tone to it. It is still wet, so it doesn't matter if you touch it, it will go back into the recesses and all that stuff as it's drying. I'm just trying to get it to stand up. That way everything flows to the bottom. And I'll let that dry, and then we'll go ahead and touch that later on with some white and some other colors to add a little more variety to it. The glazes do take a while to dry, but again, I find they don't leave that weird opacity that sometimes the shades do. Dragon guy, we're still kind of waiting for him to dry. However, we'll go ahead and do the base at this point. I did my base a little bit differently, but that's just because that's how I base my stuff. I put mine on one of the Reaper display bases. This is the, hopefully you guys can see this. This is the WizKids base that it comes with. This is the Reaper display base that I use. I use it for all of my minis. I like the way that it has the rounded edge. I'm just going to show you guys how I do these real quick. I have already glued the stand to the base. I went ahead and just took a pair of pliers and just kind of ripped it up to a point where it would stay. And then I'm just going to go through and use a little bit of super glue. And I'm not being super picky about where I'm putting this or any special way of doing this. It's really just wherever you want to put it and wherever you want it to be. And then I'm going to use some, I believe it's Hobby Scenics. It does say Star Wars Legion. That's for something totally different. And just going to dip this right in. Tap it a couple times. This is where I'm going to make a mess of Anthony's table. And that will start to add some of the texture to it. Before that completely dries, just to add a second layer of texture, I will run that same piece through some finer sand, because not everything is always going to be the same texture in real life. There's large bits of sand, there's small bits of sand, and typically after I do the larger grain, I will go through a second time, and being a little more sparing with where I put it, I will go ahead and put a few drops of this stuff wherever I just find appropriate. If there's a spot that I feel didn't get covered enough, I mean, don't be afraid to even put it right up to the base of the actual pedestal. And again, I just kind of dip it in, swirl it around, and it seems to get a pretty good coat. One thing I have found is with the thinner stuff, like the finer things like sand, I typically go through a second time because I find the first coat doesn't really completely cover like you would hope it would, but the second one does a really, really great job of that. There's one little spot right here that I'm not super happy with personally, so I'm just going to go ahead and fill that in. And again, we're going to dip it a couple times just to make sure that that's fully coated. And it kind of filled in that little hole. Go through, make sure everything is pretty well done. This I'm going to leave. I kind of like how it left a little natural ridge. It almost looks like there's like a space in between a couple rocks on there. One thing that I will also do before I paint any of this is this edge here. See how if you touch it, there's like a fine dust on it? I mean, granted, I don't recommend it, and I'm sorry to the person who does your laundry, but I do my own laundry, and I just wipe it off on my shirt just to get any of that excess dust off. That way your paint will properly stick. And now it's all nice and black again. That's really all I do for the bases. I mean, I guess if I really kind of wanted to, I feel like I may have covered up a little bit of that gray gravel just a little too much with some of the sand. So you can just go through and one more time add a little bit of the thicker stuff. It's really completely up to you how you want this to go. And that will personally be my base for my WizKids Red Dragon. I feel like it makes him a little more usable when it comes to the tabletop because it gives him a smaller base for those of you who use like Dwarven Forge tiles or any of that fun stuff. It does make them a little more maneuverable as far as table use, and I guess if you're just doing like an open world campaign kind of sandbox thing and you just draw your maps out, it really doesn't matter. But I just find it makes them more usable in game, makes them a little less daunting as far as carrying them around too. It's kind of a personal choice as to whether you want to actually attach him to this base or whether you want to leave him where you can attach him and unattach him for ease of use as far as like moving him around from place to place. One thing that I typically do is Harvest Brown, Leather Brown. Hopefully you guys can see those. That's my two gravel colors when I go to do something like this. The gravel has donated its lid to the cause. And all I'm going to do to start this all off is I'm just going to use a big giant brush. I'm not even going to water this down yet in any way, shape, or form. I really don't need to. The one thing you're going to want to not do at this point in time is touch any part of that stem that comes out that he actually sits on. Try to avoid that. Just go around it for right now. I will recommend, though, that you do take the black right up to the edge of that. I know a few of you who have come to the classes and stuff know about like the Gale Force 9, I believe, is the company that that Anthony sells here. And those grasses and stuff do work great. If you're going to use those, you don't really have to quite so much go crazy with the black undercoating on this piece. But if you're not going to use those and you're just going to have like a gravel base and you're just going to glue on like a couple of those little GW tufts and stuff, that works just as well. You don't really have to go quite as crazy with the undertone. But if you're going to leave it more open, I definitely recommend adding that black. And once you've gone around most of it, I literally just dipped this brush in the water directly. and then just took it right onto here. Now I'm going to press, I'm not touching it, but I'm pressing the bristles up to it. That little bit right there, it's not even going to matter. It's behind him, you'll never see it. Again, I'm not touching directly, I'm touching just before and pressing the bristles up to it. Now I'm kind of got a little crazy. We'll use our finger, which is the super magic eraser. This is also why I recommended you take that dust off, because if any of that dust is on here, it will dye that dust like a black color, and once it dries, you will not get it off. Again, just going through, bringing it right up to the base of that pedestal, making sure that that's well placed inside of there so that the shadow looks good when we're done. Now I'll go back to just the pure black, actually, from Reaper, and go right back into just bulking this out. It's just a base. There's nothing special about it. You don't need to be super crazy. Most of the people are going to be looking at the giant miniature that's sitting on top of it anyway. So most people don't really typically pay too much attention to the bases, but it does look great when they're also done. If you were going for kind of like a Warhammer theme, for those of you who do play Warhammer and do that kind of thing, I recommend doing all of your bases for a unit or your army. I recommend doing them all at once. If you want that unit consistency and everything to look coherent, I would highly, highly recommend doing all your bases at one time in one big swath. I'm running a little low on paint here at this point, but again, it doesn't really matter. I'm just trying to use what's left on the brush. So I don't really want to dip it again, because there's no point in putting a lot of paint on the palette if I'm just going to try to scrub this in. So I'm just very, being a little more aggressive with it and just scrubbing this really into the crevices and the creases. Just using a regular standard, nothing special about it brush. I think I bought this one at Michael's in like a 10-pack for a couple bucks. And that's pretty much the base coat of your base. These brushes are a little harder to clean for the first base coat that you do with your base, because you're going to have little tiny chunks of that like sand and that gravel in your brush. So you're really going to want to make sure when you use your cloth or your towel, not your pant leg like I do, you really want to scrub all the paint out of that furthest most point in the brush. It's all going to be caught in here. And this will be the thing that's going to ruin most of your little tiny thin brushes. Is, I know as much as we all try to clean our brushes regularly, you never really get into that little tiny point, and that's really where you need to be. Before the black even completely dries on this base, I'm just going to go right ahead and get right into doing the browns. Again, depending on what you're doing, you can kind of either jump into a brown, you can jump into a gray. It really all depends on what your world or your scenario looks like, or feels like, and what you're going for. If you want something that's more kind of natural, you can maybe go with like something that's a little more green. Again, I'm not being super touchy about where I put all this stuff. Not really being super picky about, making sure I don't bump things. I wouldn't worry about the ring of the base for now. I typically paint those independently. I find that also adds to unit cohesion if you have all of your guys painted with the same color ring on their base. I know for those of you who are DMs and for those of you who are thinking of becoming DMs, I know that that's a lot of minis to have all the same color base. One thing I do recommend is, me personally, my base color that I choose for all of my stuff is Knoll Pelt by Reaper. And one thing that I did to kind of help myself remember that is I actually just took a pen and I wrote base on the side of the sticker. That way all of my bases, if I ever have this just sitting around either on my desk, like which color is my base color, just put the word base on one of them so you always remember. There will come a time where you'll be like, man, was that base color supposed to be knoll pelt, or was it supposed to be troll hide? I don't remember. Oh yeah, that's right, I labeled the bottle. You will thank yourself later. Just trust me. I've played that game far too many times. Again, I'm just going through and not being super particular about any of this. I'm just kind of dabbing on color in like random patterns, really. I mean, earth tones and all that stuff, it's never really fully consistent. I mean, you can have some spots that are a little darker, you can have some spots that are a little lighter. I just find the more contrast that you can throw into these bases, it really just kind of helps bring the whole thing together in the end. I mean, nothing, you know, you look at dirt outside, it's not all one solid brown color, it's not all the same shade of tan. Even all the sand isn't the exact same color. So at this point, I'm just going to add a few drops of the leather brown and just do the exact same thing. I'm just taking my brush and just kind of dabbing it a few times and then just sort of touching it in random locations anywhere on the base. When this dries, it's all very, very wet right now, but when this dries, it will all look very different. And also, I had to double check. I did bring all my basing supplies, so I can actually show you guys how we do some of that stuff too. If you wanted to, at this point in time, you could maybe go through and add some gray. You could, I will throw on some mountain stone, just because, a little bit of gray here and there. Just any colors really that you feel you want to add to it. Anything that you add to it will just add to the dimension of that piece later on. I believe our dragon is almost completely dry, so we can get back to him in just a second here. If you wanted to leave it at this point in time and you wanted to leave the pedestal that he's on clear, that would be the time to leave it clear now, or again further on if you wanted to do it like a slight, I always do mine in a slight knoll oil. I just find it makes it a lot easier. It makes it look like he's floating. It doesn't make it look so prominent. So I'm just going to give this a quick coat of knoll oil while I've got it here and while I'm thinking about it. It is kind of hard to get this stuff to stick to this. You do have to put a little more on than you really think. And this is also my community knoll oil pot, so this one has been used at several painting classes, so it's all the way on the bottom. And all I'm doing is just trying to make sure that this has a consistent coating on it. You're really fighting it the whole time because it's so watered down and it's so thin with this shade. The one thing you just want to watch for specifically is don't allow any bubbles or any of the sand, like right here. The sand actually came up. I want to push that little piece of sand back down. You don't want any obstructions or any impurities on this pedestal if you can help it. And again, it's just a real quick coat of knoll oil, and you can see already the difference between the two pedestals here. How this one's much clearer. It almost looks white now that you've done this one in black. And I find in the end, this just blends a lot better, and when you're looking at it from a glance, just across the room, you happen to look over, people are playing D&D, and oh hey, wow, it looks like that dragon is just kind of floating there until you walk over and actually look at him a little more. The Way Watcher Green is drying pretty well. I'm going to give that a few more minutes though, because it's a glaze, and I just always give them an extra minute to do their thing. So we've got the flame, we've got the pedestal, and the dragon, other than a couple of little spaces here and there, overall looks pretty good. I think we can start the ridge along his back. So, I believe gold was what we had established we were going to do. At this point, I would need silver. You can do silver, you can do, I don't know if white would work as well. I haven't really personally tried it a lot, but again, I always undercoat my gold with silver. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and carefully remove him from the pedestal and just free hold him. I think it'll be a little easier to work with that ridge. I'm going to want to watch that one little spot where there's a pool there, and right here near his back leg. Everything else seems to be pretty well dry, even up around his head. Hair on there. And we can go ahead and start the silver. Just a little bit of a drop. The one thing that I will recommend you do is if you're going to switch to a silver or any kind of metallic paint, I highly recommend you use a separate cup of water for it. Because no matter how many times you wash your brush, you're always going to have little tiny metal flakes in it. And when you're getting ready to do that final coat of red on your red dragon and do that last highlight stage, when you get that weird little teeny tiny piece of metal that makes him look like he's got red chrome on him and you can't figure out how the heck it got there or how the heck you're going to get it off, that's always a frustrating point. So to save yourself that little bit of frustration, just try to use a separate tub of water if and when you can. I know it's not always possible. If it's not possible for you to do that, just try to wipe it on a different cloth. This silver coat, you really don't have to be super precise with it. It's really essentially just a base coat, and fortunately with WizKids using a very light primer, it's going to make it a little easier to transition into. But I do want to get at least something on here that has a metallic in it for the gold to try to stick to. And this will also add in that metallic presence later on down the road. When I do gold, I always kind of shoot for like an antique gold, so you'll eventually see that I really, personally in my life, I'm a big fan of silver. I actually don't own anything gold, so I kind of try to go with more of an antique, like a very old world, very dark gold. I find a lot of times with fantasy things it does work a little better. I did find one little spot down here where we got some pooling up of the wash. I'm just going to avoid that spot for now. It will eventually dry and we can get back to that, but luckily it's also underneath of his tail, which is the furthest point down in. So I'm really not super worried about it because it's going to be such a dark area anyway by the time we get done that you probably could almost just not even bother with it and you wouldn't really notice. Some of that stuff, you're really just going for table presence. You don't have to be super intricate with all of this. It doesn't have to be 100% perfect. That just kind of gives us a base, like rough coat, other than that one little spot of some silver along that ridge. This other side is going to be a little trickier because his wing definitely gets like right in the way. I suppose if this were a multi-part miniature, I probably would have not put his wings on just yet. I typically kind of throw them together and just kind of see how they sit before I decide whether I want to put them together or not. If I find that there's going to be a bunch of spaces that are going to be a pain in the butt to paint, I will typically hold off on completely assembling them and just partially assemble them. It just, again, makes it easier on you in the long run, because at that point you won't be dealing with like trying to get that one little armpit spot underneath his wing. It's like a super pain in the butt to get to. This part along the neck, as you can see, there's a lot of white primer still on here, so I'm really just kind of basically just trying to get a little bit of that metal flake on there just to get that shimmer to it. I'm not really shooting for a full, complete, like, yes, I want this piece entirely silver. It's more just, we're basically getting it silver. As long as it has some sort of metallic sheen to it, that's really all I'm shooting for right now. Obviously this is not going to be silver, it's going to be gold in the end. But I just find this is a much smoother base coat. And you typically, with most golds, if you're going over something very, very dark, you have to put 6 or 7 coats on it. Whereas if you're going over gold, or going over something that's very light, it really is just much easier. You really only have to go over it maybe 1-2 times, if that. A lot of times I can get away with it with one pass if you kind of put it on a little thicker. So we're just going to run along this ridge here, finish this up, and then we should be good to go for the majority of the dry brush on him. Get that underway, and then we should be getting ready to do some of the final stuff with the horns and all that. So I guess he's kind of a half red, half silver, brown dragon now. Again, making sure this brush is very, very well dried off at this point in time. I don't want any of that silver flake. Even though I'm going to use it for gold flake later on, I don't want much of that silver on here, if any. And at this point, we can pretty much step over to starting to dry brush the dragon himself. So, we're going to use a little bit of fire red, just a little. I'm going to, hopefully you guys can see this, equal parts of fire red and phoenix red, just to create a slightly different shade. It makes it a little lighter, but it doesn't go too crazy with it. And all I'm trying to do is just pick up a little bit of this coloration. And get as much off as I can, and then starting at the highest points and kind of gently brushing it to the side. You always want to go across when you're doing this type of stuff. It'll really help to, again, not fill in all those places that you just filled in with the washes. I'm personally finding I want a little more phoenix red in this. Again, it's all really more up to you and how you feel you want your model to look in the end. I want mine to have a little bit brighter tone up top here, so I'm going to go a little bit heavier on the phoenix red and a little less heavy on the mix on the fire red. Again, same technique, we're just dry brushing using a big super fat brush. This is where that makeup brush would come in super handy for those of you who have access to one of those. And again, we're just pressing down as we go through, and the harder you press, the more color you're going to leave behind. When you dry brush, you can kind of almost have a little bit of paint on whatever cloth you're using. Anthony's probably chuckling as I'm getting this off my leg. And all I want to do with these wings is stay mostly on these very, very high points. It's almost a little hard to see because of the lighting, but it's definitely picking up a highlight on those tallest and highest edges. Where his wing starts to curve down towards his body side, I'm actually not going to go down as far. I want that to stay a little bit darker. If, like right there, that little spot, I just had a little bit of a, not really a clump, but just like a spot where it was a little bit lighter. You know, everything is naturally occurring, and I'm sure there's some dragon out there that's got a little tiny scar on like his wing right there in that one spot. You could just say that's what it is. Again, you're always your worst critic. So as I get towards these peaks where his scales actually start, the scales, you're going to want to go against the grain on these. You're not going to want to go sideways when you're doing your highlights. That'll just allow you to pick up the edge and not anything else. That'll give you that little ridge along that scale. And again, you just kind of want to think about where the light is going to be coming from. So as I get closer to his head, I'm going to want things to be a little brighter, but I want to work against the grain on those scales to be able to pick all that out and not mess with all the other stuff. This is where it gets a little tricky, because to go against the grain on these inside scales, you almost have to be inside the wing to do it. It does get rather tedious, and you do have to be careful. You could quickly mess this up at this point in time if you either have too much paint on your brush, or if you're just, kind of haphazard. But make sure you know where your brush is at all times. If you touch something unintentionally because you went past it or you went over it, you can definitely quickly ruin a mini. His wings right here, I'm actually kind of pinching them back together, the opposite of what we've been doing most of this time, just so that I can easier get to the spaces where his wings meet. Sorry, I just whacked the camera. And more or less, I'm trying to stay away from that inside space, and I'm just trying to almost over highlight these tips of these wings at this point in time. It'll really add to the overall appearance to it in the end. I mean, that's a lot of these like GW miniatures and all these professional miniatures that you see, they're really over highlighted, and that's why they look great on the table from a few feet away. I mean, in all reality, if that was painted to scale and painted to look real, those highlights would all be so tiny that you wouldn't see them from that far away, but you do. And it's really just almost easier to go over the top with the highlights and then just leave it. There's a huge spot of orangish red paint on my jeans right now, and it's really funny. Oh, whack the camera again. I'm sorry for whacking that camera. I'm not used to having to watch the end of my brush. I'm gonna have to make like super short, like 2.5-inch brush handles to do this.
We'll have a better setup next time.
And all I'm doing is just like these claws stick way out. So again, I'm going to kind of over accentuate the highlights on these. And it'll really just bring out the fact that that's exposed to sunlight. You can already see the difference right next to it, where this leg is much darker than this leg. I'll probably highlight this knee and maybe a little bit where his foot is, but for the most part, I'm going to leave a lot of that. I'd rather have it be much darker. There is one other shade that I am going to, and by shade I don't mean wash, one other shade of color in which I'm going to use to highlight this in the end. So there will be one further stage, but for right now, you really want to be able to see all those differences in those stages. His head, obviously, is going to be crazy highlighted. It's the highest part of him. It's the part that's going to see the most light. So make sure that you definitely highlight his head. Even that lower jaw a little bit, I would get right in there. And all that's going to do, just as you're doing it, is just pull out all those details. I'm just going against, I'm holding the brush almost level to his head. And really, it's to a point where if I were to put a couple eyes in there and put a little flame coming out of that, it would look pretty tabletop worthy. We'll add that ridge. Again, I'm not being super careful about where I do and do not hit on some of these things. These models are kind of easy to get away with a little bit. They're a little more lenient. I will do this lead edge just a little bit here to say that I did it a slightly different tone. And then primarily we're just going to pick out these couple little edges on this tail. Again, leaning more towards that silver. That way we don't get any on the underbelly really. And at this point, other than re-highlighting this knee because I'm not totally happy with it, and then touching this leg is actually a little further back on the Mini itself, so I'm going to not highlight that one as much. This is where you want to kind of really start to think about your three-dimensionality. You really want to think about where the shadows are actually going to be naturally occurring. And then one quick last final highlight for his scales. I'm going to add a little bit of Reaper Fire Orange, just a dot, to say that there is a little bit in there. And I'm only going to pick out those spots that are really, really exposed. Anything that's highest up on the model, I'll go ahead and touch. Like his nose, his head, that kind of thing. I'll get a little bit along the wing, but I'm going to be very, very careful as to what I do and do not hit along that edge of that wing with that fire orange. It's a very bright color, and it's definitely going to show through, so be careful when you're going through and doing this. In the back of his head here a little bit, I'll get some of that stuff, just to say that it gets done. A little bit down in there. And that pretty much covers the scales for him in the most part. I'll do a little bit along this leg here, just to say that I got a little bit of coverage in case you look at him super, super close. But that's overall about what you're shooting for the scales. It's really just staged highlights. You can see the darker areas here, kind of the middle colors here, and then the lightest colors towards the tip of his tail a little bit, along the edge of his front paws, because he's going to be sitting primarily like this, and the sun would be coming down above him, so it would really be like this kind of stuff if you were doing like a zenithal highlighting kind of thing. Zenithal highlighting, for those that don't know, is just the sun at its zenith, which would be the highest point. So essentially it would be when the sun would be directly overhead. A lot of times people will do it with spray cans. They'll prime their Mini black, and then they'll do a zenithal highlight by just dusting over the top of the Mini from the top down. For those that wanted to know how to do zenithal highlighting, that's how you do that. We're pretty much good on the reds from here, so we'll kind of generally pack those up to get a little bit of stuff off the desk. The silvers we're good on, the browns we're good on, gold, and then at that point we'll get into some of a little bit of highlighting on the underside of the skin. This is where you want to do kind of be a little bit more careful when you're doing like his underbelly scales and stuff, because the highlights, again, they're going to be kind of funny because they're upside down. It's kind of the same principle as with the wings. So when you do these, you're really only going to want to do the very, very highest points when you go through. And all you're going to want to do is just touch a little bit on those high points. Just very carefully creating an edge along some of those scales. You don't really need to do them all either. It's just kind of whatever works for you, I suppose. And again, you're going to want to work against the grain on these. I wouldn't recommend going too far into that underbelly, or it's going to look a little weird. I wouldn't go under that neck either. I would really primarily just keep it in this area, where his chest kind of bumps out a little bit, and then a little bit along his tail. Maybe bring that up to a white point up there. And I know it's hard for you guys to see this on the camera, but underneath his tail a little bit. Maybe a little bit of white just where his hands and his paws and his little toe beans are. We'll go ahead and do those again. And then this is where you wanted to kind of be careful, and I told you not to go too crazy with the shadow along the edge of his wing, because again, it's going to be upside down, so I just put a little bit of a highlight where the sun would be hitting on that inside edge of his wing. Because if he were standing like this, a little bit of light would be going down into there. Not a lot, but just a very, very little. And I do like to try to get that natural highlight in there just on those spots inside the wing. Just primarily the tips, maybe a little bit on that lead edge if the wing is open a little more, but this guy's wings are pretty well kind of closed. I mean, I can touch it just to say I did, but that'll primarily give you that like kind of sunny highlight, and it makes this part of the wing a little bit darker too. Personally, if you wanted it a little darker than that even, you could go through here and almost do a second wash. At this point, again, he's kind of still pliable, so I'm going to pull his wings apart just a little bit because we're going to get to that point where we're going to do that ridge. So I want those wings to be a little more pliable than they normally would be. So kind of start to work them now. That way you can get into that little ridge, which will be the next part that we are going to work on, is going to be that spine ridge, and then from there it's pretty much just finish up the claws and the nails and finish up the ring on the base, and we can check on our little flame dude here. Yes, it's a flame. Going to rework this putty a little bit here to kind of hold it a little better.
We're still working on her stomach scales, she says. And Will's saying, yeah, it's starting to pop.
So now I'm just going to put a very, very, very light dry brush of a little bit of that graveyard bone over this flame, going from the tip down. And as you're building that up, you can kind of just lightly add a little bit more to it as far as the color goes. But as you add more color to it, stay further towards the top. Come through and again kind of go over it at an angle across the side. That'll really give you that overall appearance of not filling in those little gaps. And I'll switch over to the bleached linen, more of a bright white. I prefer bleached linen as a color to stark white because I feel like pure white is a very, very hard color to have naturally occurring anywhere. Unless you like bleach something, you're never really going to have a pure white. You're always going to have a slightly dulled down. Now right here I'm going through and it looks like a lot of paint, but it's not. As I smear it around, it's going to start to fade out towards that lower point. And then one last time I'll come through here with one more final highlight on that very tip top. And that'll be about it. I will probably go through one more time with the Waywatcher green and put a little bit along that bottom edge right here. I'm not super happy with how that looks. But again, it's all really personal preference and personal taste. If you like how it looks right now, fine. If you would rather have it be a little bit darker green, that is also fine too. I'll take a little bit of this and just touch. I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that this sticky putty kind of absorbed some of the green. As you can see right here, it kind of stuck to that a little more. The other thing you can do is, now that you've gotten that white and now that you've got that opacity to it, you can actually kind of come back through and pluck out a few more of those little details in the flame if you want some spots that are a little darker than others, and it'll kind of help bring a little bit more depth to that flame. I mean, not everything is going to be perfectly whatever color you intended it to be. I find with flames and with spell effects and that kind of thing, the more rough and tumble it looks, almost the better. And this stuff is so thin, it won't really stick to that white paint as much as you would think it would. And then just along the bottom, way down here, just kind of make sure you blend that part of it out so that it doesn't stick too much. And that's pretty much the green see-through flame. If you want to, again, all you have to do is replace the green with orange, replace the green with blue, I mean, you could even use whatever color flame you want. You could make using this technique. All you have to do is switch out the Weight Watcher green for any other color. So for those who have been asking all the time at the painting classes how I do see-through objects, that's how you make see-through fire. That's how I make see-through fire. I suppose I should reiterate that. At this point, we're going to get ready to do that spine ridge, and then from there it's just going to be finish up the little bit on the base. Speaking of the base, I can kind of show this to you guys now that things have started to dry. You can definitely see the difference between the one post and the other. This one almost looks more white. I prefer this style. I find it blends better into the base, and you can see how those colors are really starting to mix together now, and it just creates a very natural earth tone. All you would have to do to this base to finish it off completely at this point without adding any foliage to it would be to just paint this ridge along the edge of that base, and you could use that as a very tabletop worthy mini. If you wanted to go a little more, while we're waiting for these few things to dry here, I'll move some stuff out of the way. Anything specific you guys would like to see done as far as this base goes, I'll kind of give that a second. I've got all my basing materials with me. I've got small plants, I've got little bushes, I've got the static grass. Is there anything that you guys would specifically like to see me do to this base while I start the ridge on him and get the gold base layer? I'll give you guys a few seconds to come up with something you would potentially like to see. Snow is not an option. He's a dragon. He melts snow.
I just posted the questions here.
I have enough snow stuff going on with my Warhammer 40k army that not a lot of people know I'm currently building.
Tool works, huh?
For those who are interested, it's going to be a Space Wolves army. All you Tau players better watch out. As Anthony shakes his head like, did you really just call out the Tau players?
They're probably jonesing right now.
So again, we're just going through along here, and all I'm doing is just putting in a light base.
Yeah, that's fine. Just
going through and doing a light coating of this gold. It doesn't have to be super precise because we're going to go through and do a wash at the end of this. And all I'm really looking for is just that fine gold hue. It doesn't have to actually be gold, it just has to look gold. That can be a big thing. I mean, if you were making like a gold brick, or if you were doing like a treasure chest or something that had to actually be gold, yes, I would make sure that it was a very stark, very bright gold. But because this is a naturally occurring, almost more meant to be like scales, I would probably recommend something that looks a little more naturally occurring, and something that's not like, hey, this looks like this dragon was minted out of freshly poured gold bars. I just find it looks awkward. I guess, in my opinion, it looks awkward. I don't know if maybe somebody else would disagree with that, but again, at this point in time, watching all my cords, toodles. I am just more or less putting a gold tone on this. I'm not being super crazy about it. I'm not like, okay, you know, every little square inch of this has to be gold. Because, luckily, when you go over it with that silver base coat, when you go over this with the Reikland Flesh Shade, anything that's not gold is going to look gold because you went over it with the silver, so you've got the metallic in there. And then that metallic, when filled in with the Reikland Flesh Shade, will turn almost a gold copper color anyway. So anything that you really missed or didn't quite exactly do will kind of be covered up anyway. It's like a little kind of try to do it cheaper trick, I guess. You don't have to be super precise with it as long as you went through and did that silver base first. So again, all we're doing is just kind of plucking around through here, pulling this stuff out. If I feel I want to add detail, all I have to do is just go a little closer. If I want it to just kind of be an overall appearance, just kind of pull back a little bit and really just let the paint stick where it wants to, and don't be so super worried about it. The only thing you want to be worried about when going through here, and you can see I'm really pulling on his wing. These minis are a little tougher than you would think. If this was a GW mini, I obviously would not recommend you pull on his wing. They're made out of a different plastic, but Reaper and WizKids stuff seems to be very forgiving as far as that aspect of it goes. I apologize if it is hard for you guys to see, but I have to kind of see where my light is going to be able to get into that little ridge right there. Alright, so I got that ridge running all down along his back. As you can see, it's not perfect, but it will eventually fill in to a point where you won't even notice that at all, and it's just going to absolutely look like it's all one solid thing. So we're going to go down the other side here and do the other ridge. Any feedback on the base yet?
Yes, let's see. We have maybe something burnt or some OSL from the flame.
Everybody's all about the OSL. It's such a hard thing to do. I mean, you can do it. I have done an entire mini in OSL. It was actually a gnome for a friend of mine. And it does come out really well. The one thing that you have to try to remember when you're doing OSL, and if you watch any of the videos on OSL, that's why, you know, I don't mean to make it seem like I'm avoiding doing OSL, but if you're going to paint a mini using OSL, or object source lighting, for those who don't know what that terminology is, you essentially have to base coat the mini completely different. And you actually, when you do object source lighting, it's actually interesting because you actually have to add a second light source when you're doing it. You have to have, it comes from two directions. You have to have the light that is being cast by the object, and you also have to have the light that is being cast by the surroundings of the object. And when I did the mini that I did in OSL for a friend of mine, I actually did the entire mini blue, and then only the OSL was painted red, and it was painted like the flame colors of the candles of the room that he was standing in. So I guess I don't really mean to make it seem like I'm trying to avoid OSL, but that would almost be an entire video in and of itself, because you essentially have to start the mini completely different in order to finish completely different. I mean, you could add OSL to this guy right now and, you know, make it look like the flame that's shooting out of his mouth is adding some green to him, but overall, it's not going to have the effect that you would hope it would. It's basically just going to look like you dry brushed some green paint on it at the last minute and just tried to call it OSL, and it's not going to, again, it's just not going to be what you're hoping for. So I don't mean to seem like I'm avoiding OSL, I don't have a problem doing it, but that would be almost an entire video in and of itself. I would have painted this dragon blue, and I would have made it look like he was sitting under the moonlight, and then I would have done the orange or the green flame. So we've got the ridge pretty much done on him at this point in time. It's getting to a point you can tell when it's in the direct light that it's definitely gold and metallic, but when it's in the shade, it almost looks like it blends in with his body scales and his wings, which I really like. At this point, we're going to get ready to do the mouth area, we're going to do the eyes, and then we're going to go around and do all the horns real quick. And then pretty much I'd say we're probably within a half an hour of tying this all up. I know we kind of went a little over the time.
A little.
A couple hours. I'm calling the gold done, so I'm going to put that back into my box. The graveyard bone we're going to need, the leather brown we're going to need, and the black we're going to need for doing the claws and the horns. The goblin skin, or the ogre skin, the yellow, I really didn't end up doing. I kind of more went with a white color for the undertone on the scales. You could also do yellow. I don't, when I do scales, or when I do horns, and when I do claws, I don't ever finish them in a stark white, like a pure white. I just always find that, like, all these monsters that live in these caves and stuff that are scratching at the dirt all day and doing what they do and doing their things, they really typically don't overall have much accommodation for washing their hands. I guess they wouldn't be COVID-19 approved. So they're going to be a lot dirtier. They're going to have a lot of time. It'd be kind of like running around outside and playing around for a few hours and then coming back in and your nails and hands and everything's going to be dirty. So you don't want everything to look super clean. And at this point, basin. Anybody else other than...
So those were the only...
The burnt, we could do... The burnt, you would almost be better off to kind of try to make that like a diorama base. Like maybe have like another figure that you had in like your bulk bin that kind of, you know, you only have like half of a guy, make him look like maybe he got like burnt to a crisp, have like a skeleton laying there. It would almost be better to make an object look burnt than it would to make the entire base look burnt, unless you were going for like a lava base, which you would have to kind of start and you would have
setup,
you would have to do almost an entirely different setup. I do have actually an example, sort of. When I do lava bases, I kind of do them like this guy, and I'll actually take pieces of cork, and I will use the cork, and then I would go through in any of the flat spaces, I would paint to look like lava, and then all the cork would be the ground or the land that he is actually sitting on, so that would be painted like your land color. This is also a hint of the other 40K army that I have. That would probably be how I would go about doing that aspect of things. Is I would definitely more kind of do that as its own base type of thing. You can also do that same theory, and it's the same principles, just you use blue and white if you want to make it like an ice base or a snow base, like kind of what I'm shooting for my Space Wolves army. Or like we did with the Yetis in the painting class. We went through and we dry brushed and did all that blue before we went through and did any of the whites. At this point, the flame looks like it's drying quite nicely. The one thing that I would do to this as a real quick, just last minute addition to help this out is now that it's getting to a point where it's very wet, to a point where I can actually take it right off of this, I would actually add a little bit of black wash towards this end of it, just to add a little bit of a shade and a shadow where it comes out of his mouth. And this is where you're going to run into those tide lines to an extent. And this is where, again, you just get it to a point where there's not much wash left on your brush and just pull backwards. And that'll help eliminate those tide lines. And that'll really get you that. It looks like this is where the flame source is. Like it came out of his mouth as a fireball and it's creating a shadow that's being left behind. I could put it in at this point in time, but I'm going to wait until that black dries a little bit. I'm just going to carefully set this aside so that it hangs over, so that that black dries without touching anything. This base we're essentially done with at this point in time. That one we just need to add some foliage to, I suppose, would be the easiest route to go.
That sounds good.
As soon as I get all my other stuff out of the house. Gale Force 9, the static grass that Anthony does sell at the store. This is actually a very, very, very old container. I'm pretty sure the new ones don't look like this anymore. And with this stuff, it's super easy to use for those who haven't ever used it before. All you're going to do is just add a little dot of glue wherever you want the grass. We'll add a little dot right through here. And then while holding it over the container, just sprinkle a little bit of that stuff on there. I mean, don't be afraid to put a giant pile of it where you want everything to be. And just kind of tap it around a little bit just to make sure it sticks before you turn it over. And that's how you get little grass tufts. Again, just add it where you want your little grasses to be. If you spread them out, I find it looks a lot better. And just go through like you're adding a pinch of salt to your favorite Italian meal. I'm French Canadian, nothing against Italians. And again, tap it, and that just leaves behind. I want to get right here. If you find you don't put enough on, or you find it doesn't quite stick how you want it to, just add a little bit more to it before your glue dries, and you're good to go. Blow on it one time just to get any of the excess off. We'll add a little bit more back here. I think we're actually going to make a little spot back here where the grass is growing down and around. Again, just being super generous with this stuff, dumping it all over the place, trying not to make a huge mess of this table.
It's all good.
Blow on it just a little bit to get any of the excess off. Feel like we need some over here. And that should give us a fairly good overall appearance. Grass doesn't always grow everywhere. I mean, it doesn't have to be all over the place. If you miss a spot or you don't want a spot with grass, that's totally acceptable too. We'll put a little bit over here just to give it some symmetry. And that's how you do a base. Basically. Horrible dad joke, I apologize. And again, just so you can kind of see, I'll get rid of all that. And that's how you do a base, or how I do a base.
Round of applause. I don't have that program to be an applause button.
Oh, we don't have sound effects yet? It's not like the old studios where you just click on a light and everybody in the crowd
Right.
claps. And I find that really makes it a lot better than that solid clear one that it comes with. I don't know. I really don't care for it personally. It's all up to you. That's just my personal preference. I guess I'm allowed to have an opinion at this point in time. My opinion is I like them better shaded. So, most people have a little bit of Nuln oil to use. Go ahead and use a little bit and hook yourself up with a cool base. We're going to, now that the gold is dried, we're going to go back through and do the Reichland flesh shade before we go through and finish up with the claws and the teeth and the horns and the fangs. Here it is. Going through and again just adding this to here, and you can already see how it makes that like antique gold, almost like a brass kind of look. I personally love that look. I think it does real well for anything. Again, we're just going through and going against the grain, kind of sideways on all of this stuff to add some of that scale and to add some detail and texture to those ridges. It doesn't have to be super prominent. Gold is kind of a interesting color to use. It's going to ultimately, it's not going to be as bright as you think, but it's also not going to be as dull as you think. A lot of times the tables in a lot of your game stores and stuff have fluorescent lighting. This is an art light, so what's going to happen is there's actually a lot of light saturation that's going on right now because the light is so bright in front of me. It's actually going to be a little more dull than you think, but what it'll do is under those fluorescent lights, anything that's gold or anything that's metallic shows up a lot better. So try not to overdo it when you're sitting at your desk because it does look a lot different. That would be, I guess, my one biggest suggestion is if anybody's going to take anything away from this class, or this tutorial, I suppose, my one suggestion would be look at your mini in several different light sources. Look at him under your lamp. Look at him outside. Look at him under the light in your kitchen. I mean, anything, just any different type of light bulb. Look at the mini under different types of lighting and you will see all those variations, and it is a lot bigger difference than you think. And you can almost use it to an extent once you kind of figure it out how to sort of, I don't want to say exploit, but you can use it to your strength and your weaknesses. You can kind of add to certain things or take away from certain things, knowing what light your mini is going to be looked at. It really all depends on what's going on. If you're, playing with a bunch of friends in a dimly lit room, I mean, everything's going to look very dull. If you're playing in a well-lit art studio, things are going to look a lot crisper. It's really all circumstantial, I suppose. So again, all we did was just add that little bit of a wash. I'm going to go through and make sure that I didn't put too much in any specific one place. And that's primarily how to do the back ridge of the red, gold, bronze dragon. If he stays there, that would be great. I don't know if he will. I don't have him fully pressed in, so he's quite literally floating there. But that's essentially how you do that ridge. I don't like that one being spotted. Yeah, I tend to do that a lot. You kind of step back and you're like, oh, I don't like that spot. I'm just going to pull a little bit of that wash out of there and maybe add it to here, or But that's essentially that ridge completely done. Easy, not too terribly difficult, not too overcomplicated either, but it's also simple enough that it looks good. Okay, now that he's fully pressed into the base, now I don't need to worry about him falling over. Essentially, we have to do the horns, finish up his mouth, and he's primarily getting towards the point of done. A little bit more to dry on that, but that's eventually what it's going to ultimately look like. I would potentially put that in there, but I'm going to hold off on it now only because it'll be easier to do all of his teeth in one shot with his horns and his claws. So at this point, we're going to use a little bit of leather brown, the same color we used for all of his little under highlights. Much smaller brush. Mixing, this time I'm going to mix it a little thicker. I would say maybe 2 to 1 water and paint, respectively. More paint than water. And more or less, you're just going to go through and pick out all of these little nails, all of these little claws. And all you got to do is really just touch them. It doesn't really have to be, again, super crazy. It's just a final detail thing. Just run through and touch all the little claws. You do the front feet, do the back feet, do the head. He's got a lot of horns and stuff on his head, so that's going to take a minute, but this is where you're going to start to really build up your fine details, and this is where you're really going to start to see the mini come together. I'm going to go through and do the same thing on the back side. Same thing up top. And along these guys here. Any spots that you missed along the wing, now is a good time to fill those in. But primarily it should just be, at this point, filling in those little horns and all the little spikes and spaces. So we're going to do those, we'll do all these. And then all you're going to do, once you do these, is just keep adding these colors gradually. So you'll start with the brown, and then eventually you're going to move on to the graveyard bone, and just leave a little bit of the brown behind. Just leave a little bit of color behind every time. Slowly working your way up until you get to whatever your whitest white is. Again, I personally don't use pure white when it comes to bones and horns and that kind of type of thing. I find it just looks a little better if you keep it a little dirtier. It looks a little more natural. I don't know, I suppose maybe if you guys have found a dragon that is very well manicured, please let me know. I'm sure there's a lot of dragons out there that would love to know of somebody who is a good manicure, pedicure individual. And all we're doing here is just going through and picking out the little ridges along the horns. Same thing with all the little nails and claws and all that fun stuff. And same thing with the teeth. We're just going to go through and just touch each one briefly, leaving a little bit of the shadow area behind. Do all the little horns along his head. He's got quite a few. Switch to the other side. Same thing. horns, teeth, right down along the whole thing. You can almost do them in one shot. I'm going to give him a little tiny little bump on the end of his nose there. We'll call that a growing horn, maybe. Not fully there like the, what is it, the black dragon or the green dragon that has a big giant horn. I think it's the Reaper green dragon that has the big giant horn sticking out the end of his head. Again, at this point, we're just going through and just touching all these little details. I'm not being super picky about how much paint is on them. I'm not trying to be super detail oriented. As long as they're covered and as long as they're the color that I want them to be, that's the primary objective. If you wanted to spend a ton of time going through and picking out all of these, you definitely could. But more or less just for tabletop purposes, or I'm bringing this to a friend's house to use this weekend in some kind of game, just go ahead and bulk it out. It's a lot easier. It's not like, maybe this guy's your main character, but most of the time, a young red dragon would probably not be your big bad endgame boss, whatever. Don't ever throw a beholder at your first level character. You will not survive. And that's primarily the first coat down on all that stuff. And it's just going to be dry brushing from here. It's real simple dry brushing on these horns. It's nothing we haven't done yet. That one little spot that I forgot underneath the base of the horn. And that's primarily where we're going to go from there, is just touch these up in a lighter tone with this graveyard bone. Go through and just touch just the ridges, and he's pretty much done. I will go through right now, and I'm not even going to clean my brush off. I will literally leave brown on this brush right now. Not even going to clean it off. I'm going to grab a little bit of black. I'm just going to touch the inside ridge of that mouth, just to say that it got done before I put that flame in there. Again, nothing big, nothing crazy, just touched it with a little bit of black, just to give it some detail. Should be good on the black. I suppose since we're going with a green flame, we might as well go with green eyes. So, I'm just going to give him a little tiny dot. This is that bravery test. A little tiny dot, if I can even see it. Trying to do this on camera is like the hardest thing ever.
It's looking good though.
And there's his eyes. They're very, very hard to see, but he's a very, very tiny dragon. They are there, you can tell. That's that kind of light saturation thing kind of working against us again. There's such an intense light right here behind me to be able to paint all of this that it's very, very hard to see that little tiny green eye, but it is definitely there. If you really wanted to go a little more crazy with it, you could just say you had a tiny, tiny black dot. I'm not going to, for all intents and purposes, on this guy. But if you wanted to, you could add that. Most of the time when I'm doing creatures, I will typically not add a dot for the eye, and I will actually add a slit for the eye. I just find personally I like that a little better. I feel like in my world or in my campaign or my setting, I feel like dots are reserved for humanoids. I feel that kind of almost adds to like a feel of, well, obviously this is not a humanoid, or obviously, this is an enemy. He's got little slits in his eyes. It just kind of gives the players something to go off of, I guess. And then the final thing we're going to do is just come through here and we're just going to add a little bit of a highlight to each one of these claws. Again, I don't use a pure white. I'm using a graveyard bone right here. Just briefly going through and adding a little tiny dot. You don't need to go crazy with it. All you need is just a little highlight to show that there's a little bit of color there. Especially towards like the back, like back here. All I'm doing is just a little tiny dot. You don't really even need to like actually accentuate all of that. The ones up top, I would probably put a little more time into, or maybe a little more of a pronounced highlight into, because they definitely will have that pronounced highlight because they're higher up on him. They would naturally be lighter. So again, on these, we're going to kind of go through and make the bright patch a little brighter. These guys, I would probably put the highest highlight point almost in the back, actually, because anything else is going to be shaded under his wing. So I would potentially put these in the back. I believe that's good for all the wing claws. Now all we got to do is the stuff up top. Pretty much working around his head at this point in time. I just bumped that camera one more time. You guys must hate me for that by now. And we're just going through and picking out all of these. If you really want detail, you can almost add like streaks to your spines. Any of your claws, any of that stuff. If I'm really going for like super detail, like my my hunter character, I went through and I specifically did all of these. And it will really add to the overall look of your mini if you go through and do each individual one. You don't have to, but you can. And again, just primarily going through and just touching each one. And you just, as you work your way down, it just looks better and better and better. Add a little bit more to these lower ones here because they're obviously the bigger spines of that part. Maybe add a second little ridge cap. And then the same thing on the other side of both of these. And again, when you're doing these little like side details, you can almost add like lines to these little tiny horns and tusks and things, and it really does add a little bit of detail to it. It really all depends on how much time you want to spend on your mini. I mean, you could sit here for hours and hours and hours. I have. And all I'm really doing at this point in time is just adding a little bit of a dot to the end of each of those horns, or each of those teeth, or each of those fangs, whatever it may be, just to pick them out separate from the body. for the most part, that is a Reaper, or WizKids, sorry, Reaper Paint WizKids Mini Red Dragon. You can do the base, the little ring around the base, whatever color you would like. That one I will sign.
So here, Chris, this is you're gonna be live here, and you can say hi to everybody.
We gotta add his little flame for the last final thing.
You're on this one. Okay. Say hi to everybody.
How's it going? Everybody liking this? Think we're gonna do this a couple more times? Different minis? We'll throw on his flame. And that's a done dragon.
Woohoo! Excellent. Oh, you're off there. You're back on that one now. Sweet. Let's see. You got any more? Yeah, the little details make a tremendous difference. Everybody's saying. Yeah. And you did give some people some anxiety with the open pot of whatever you had open there, the wash.
Be brave.
And I told them that's okay, because you know, every time people spill it, I get to make more sales.
Yep.
Awesome.
Well, I definitely appreciate and thank everybody for tuning in and being a part of this. I'm sure Anthony does too, and I would absolutely love to do this more in the future. So, thanks again.
Awesome. So that will conclude our very first paint event online with Chris at Hidden Passage Art Studio, and can't wait to see our next one.
He will remain here too, so if people want to reference him.
Awesome. And if you just heard that, the Red Dragon will be here at the shop, so if you want to see it in person, there you go. And another recap, next Sunday at noon will be the cutoff for our painting contest. And remember, $7 or less Reaper Mini. Hopefully you have one already. If not, you can come let me know. And it has to be a plastic one, and it's a free painting contest, and the winner will get a $20 gift certificate to the store. So can't wait to see everybody. Be well, be safe, and we'll see you next time.